Tonight, we explore one of the most gentle teachings in Zen Buddhism, the teaching of compassion. Compassion is what makes us soft, open, and at ease. It is how we make peace with our own lives. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. We often believe that compassion means feeling sorry for others or rushing to fix their problems. But Zen points to a different understanding. True compassion is what happens when the walls between ourselves and others grow thin. It is wisdom expressing itself through kindness. It is presence offered without condition. Tonight, we will explore this teaching through stories and reflections. We will meet people who discovered that their attempts to help were sometimes getting in the way. We will see how understanding can soften even the hardest judgments. And we will find that compassion is not something we must create, but something that is already here, waiting to be uncovered. The Buddha taught that compassion and wisdom are like two wings of a bird. Neither can fly alone. Tonight, we will discover how they move together, carrying us toward a kinder way of being in the world. Take a slow, deep breath and let us begin our journey together. There is an old saying in Buddhism that compassion is the heart's natural response to suffering. When we see someone in pain, something in us wants to help. This impulse is beautiful and important. It connects us to one another. It reminds us that we are not separate beings moving through the world alone. But Zen Buddhism invites us to look more closely at this impulse. Sometimes what we call compassion is actually something else. It might be a need to feel useful. It might be discomfort with another person's pain and a wish to make that discomfort go away. It might be a belief that we know what is best for someone else and a desire to steer them toward it. True compassion is simpler and more humble than all of this. It begins with presence, with really seeing another person, not as a problem to be solved, but as a fellow traveler on this uncertain path of being alive. When we can offer this kind of seeing, something remarkable happens. The other person feels met. They feel less alone. And often, that is exactly what they needed, even if nothing about their outer situation has changed. Let us explore a story that shows how one woman discovered the difference between helping and truly being present. In a valley where two rivers met and rice paddies stretched toward distant hills, there lived a healer named Lin, who was known throughout the region for her skill. She had learned the old ways from her grandmother, and then from a traveling physician who had stayed in their village for 3 years. She knew which herbs eased fever, and which roots calmed a racing heart. She knew how to set bones and dress wounds and brew teas that helped people sleep through pain. Lin worked constantly. Before dawn, she was already grinding medicines in her stone mortar, the rhythmic sound echoing through her small house. After dark, she was still visiting the sick, her lantern bobbing along muddy paths between farms. Villagers said she had healing hands, and she took pride in this. When someone suffered, she felt a pull in her chest that would not ease until she had done something to help them. But lately, something had changed. Lin was tired in a way that sleep could not fix. Her shoulders ached from bending over patients. Her mind raced even when she lay down at night, reviewing everyone she had seen, worrying about whether she had done enough. She would think of a child's cough and wonder if she had used the right remedy. She would remember an old farmer's trembling hands and question whether there was something she had missed. And despite all her work, suffering continued. People still fell ill. Injuries still happened. Some patients grew better, but others did not, no matter how hard she tried. There was a woman with a wasting sickness that no herb could touch. There was a young man whose leg had been crushed by a fallen tree and who would never walk easily again. Lynn had done everything she knew, and still their pain remained. She began to feel a quiet desperation. If she just knew more, perhaps she could help more. If she just worked harder, perhaps she could ease more pain. She doubled her efforts, sleeping less, taking on more patients, traveling to distant farms to see people who could not come to her. Her husband worried. Her children missed her. But Lynn could not stop. Every person she did not help felt like a failure. One autumn afternoon, a wandering monk arrived in the village. He was an old man with kind eyes and worn sandals, carrying nothing but a wooden staff and a small bundle wrapped in faded cloth. He asked if he might rest in the temple for a few days before continuing his journey. Lynn happened to be at the temple that day, delivering medicine to one of the elderly caretakers who suffered from aching joints when the weather turned cold. She noticed the monk sitting quietly in the courtyard, watching the leaves fall from a ginkgo tree. Golden leaves drifted down around him, and he watched each one as if it were the most interesting thing in the world. Something about his stillness caught her attention. In a life full of rushing from one patient to the next, she had almost forgotten what stillness looked like. Even when her body was at rest, her mind was always moving, planning, worrying. But this monk seemed to have found a way to simply be where he was. Over the following days, Lynn found herself noticing the monk whenever she passed the temple on her rounds. He did very little. He sat in the courtyard in the morning light. He walked slowly around the grounds in the afternoon, sometimes stopping to watch a bird or examine a stone. He helped with small tasks when asked, sweeping leaves or carrying water, but he never seemed hurried. There was a quality of ease about him that Lynn found both puzzling and strangely attractive. How could anyone be so calm when there was so much suffering in the world? One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Lynn found herself walking toward the temple instead of going home. That afternoon, she had sat with an old seamstress named Suki, who had been ill for many weeks. Lynn had tried every remedy she knew. She had brewed the strongest teas, applied the most potent poultices, consulted her grandmother's worn notebooks for forgotten cures. But nothing had worked. And that afternoon, with Lynn still measuring out another dose of medicine, Suki had quietly stopped breathing. Lynn did not know what she was looking for at the temple. She only knew that she was exhausted in a way that went beyond her body, and that the monk's quietness called to something in her. She found him sitting on the temple steps, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. He did not seem surprised to see her. He simply moved slightly to one side, making room for her to sit. For a while, neither of them spoke. Lynn felt her breathing slow as she sat there. The evening air was cool on her face. Somewhere in the village, a dog barked and then fell silent. The stone steps were cold beneath her, but she did not mind. It felt good to simply sit, to not be going somewhere, to not be doing something. Finally, she spoke. "I am the healer in this village. I try to help everyone who comes to me. But today, a woman died despite everything I did. I mixed the right medicines. I stayed by her side for hours, and still she is gone." The monk nodded slowly, his eyes still on the stars. You carry a heavy burden. I chose this burden. Healing is my work, my purpose. But lately, I feel like I am failing. No matter how much I do, suffering continues. People keep hurting. People keep dying. What is the point of all my work if I cannot stop the pain? The monk was quiet for a long moment. A night bird called somewhere in the darkness. Then he said, "May I tell you something I have observed during my days here? Please. I have watched you come and go from this temple. I have seen how you rush from place to place, how your face is tight with worry, how you never seem to rest. And I have wondered something." He turned to look at her, his eyes gentle in the starlight. "In all your hurrying to help others, have you ever simply sat with someone who was suffering? Not fixing, not treating, not doing anything at all. Just being there, fully present, with nothing to offer but your attention?" Lynn considered this. The truth was, she could not remember the last time she had sat with a patient without her hands busy, without her mind calculating the next remedy. Even when she held someone's hand, part of her was already thinking about what else she could try, what other herbs might help, what she might be missing. "I am not sure I know how to do that," she admitted. "When I see someone suffering, I feel like I must do something. Just sitting there feels like giving up." That is understandable. You were trained to help, and helping feels like doing. But sometimes the deepest help we can offer is simply our presence. The monk picked up a fallen ginkgo leaf from the step beside him, turning it over in his weathered hands. When we sit with someone who is suffering, truly sit with them without needing to change anything, we offer something that no medicine can provide. We offer the gift of not being alone. Lynn felt something stir in her chest, but also a resistance. But if I am not trying to fix the problem, am I not just accepting defeat? Am I not failing them? The monk shook his head slowly. There is a difference between giving up and letting go of control. When you try to fix everything, you carry an impossible weight. You take responsibility for outcomes that were never yours to determine. Some people will heal, and some will not, regardless of what you do. This is not defeat. This is simply the truth of being human. He paused, looking at her with kindness. The woman who died today, in her final hours, what do you think she needed most? Another remedy? Or someone who could simply be with her, without agenda, offering the warmth of human presence as she made her passage? Lynn felt tears rise unexpectedly. She thought of Suki, who had been known for her careful stitches, who had made Lynn's wedding dress many years ago. In those last hours, Lynn had been so focused on trying one more treatment, checking one more symptom, that she had barely looked into Suki's eyes. She had been so busy trying to save her that she had not truly been with her. She had been measuring herbs while Suki was measuring her final breaths. "I think I understand," Lynn said quietly. "I was so focused on fighting her death that I forgot to be present for her life. For those final moments of her life, it is a common thing," the monk said gently. "We are taught that helping means doing, and doing is important. Your medicines ease suffering, and that is a great gift. But sometimes the most profound help is simply being. When we can sit with suffering without running away, without immediately trying to fix it, we offer something precious. We say, through our presence, that this person matters, that their experience matters, that they are not alone in the great mystery of being alive. Lynn sat with this for a long time. The stars grew brighter as the sky darkened. She noticed that she was no longer thinking about tomorrow's patients, about the medicines she needed to prepare, about all the work waiting for her. She was simply here, on these stone steps, breathing the cool night air, feeling the weight of her own tiredness without trying to push it away. "How do I learn to do this?" she asked finally. "How do I learn to be present when every part of me wants to do something?" "It begins with noticing," the monk replied. "When you are with someone who is suffering, notice the urge to fix. It will arise, strong and insistent. You do not need to fight it. Simply notice it, and then gently set it aside. Return your attention to the person in front of you, their face, their breath, the reality of their experience in this moment. Let yourself be curious about them, rather than busy with solutions." He paused, then added, "And perhaps sometimes you might also practice being present with your own suffering. You carry much weariness, much grief for those you could not save. Have you ever simply sat with that grief, without trying to push it away or justify it or overcome it?" Lynn realized that she had not. Her own pain was something she had always tried to outrun, staying busy enough that she never had to feel it fully. The faces of those she had lost would rise in her mind, and she would push them away by focusing on those she might still save. "I am afraid of what I might feel if I stopped," she admitted. "That is honest," the monk said. "But the feelings are there whether you stop or not. They are simply waiting in the shadows. When you can turn toward them with the same presence you wish to offer others, something softens. The grief does not disappear, but it becomes bearable. It becomes part of being human, rather than a weight you must carry alone." In the weeks that followed, Lynn began to practice what the monk had shown her. It was not easy. When she sat with patients, the urge to do something was almost unbearable. Her hands itched to reach for herbs. Her mind spun with possible treatments. But she practiced noticing this urge and gently setting it aside. Slowly, something shifted. She began to see her patients differently, not just as problems to be solved, but as people with their own stories, their own fears, their own dignity. She noticed things she had missed before in her hurrying. The way an old man's eyes lit up when he spoke of his grandchildren. The quiet courage of a young mother facing an uncertain illness. The peace on a dying woman's face when someone simply held her hand without trying to change anything. She still used her medicines and her skills. She still worked hard to ease suffering where she could. But she held it all more lightly now. She did what she could, and then she let go. She offered her presence as freely as she offered her remedies. And strangely, though she was doing less, her patients often seemed to heal more. Perhaps it was because they felt truly seen. Perhaps it was because her own calmness helped them relax. Or perhaps it was simply that healing, like so many things, works best when we stop grasping at it so tightly. This story shows us something important about the nature of true compassion. Lynn had spent years believing that compassion meant fixing, solving, doing. But her constant doing had become a kind of barrier. It kept her separate from the very people she was trying to help. It was only when she learned to simply be present that her compassion could truly flow. Zen teaches us that presence is itself a gift. When we are fully here with another person, not planning what to say next, not calculating how to help, just attentive and open, we offer something rare. In a world where everyone is rushing, true presence is a form of love. Buddhism shows us that this kind of presence requires a certain trust. We must trust that we do not always need to fix things. We must trust that sometimes the most helpful thing we can do is simply witness another person's experience without trying to change it. This is not passivity or indifference. It is a deep respect for the other person's journey and a willingness to walk beside them without needing to lead. The Buddha taught that all beings want to be happy and free from suffering. This is the ground of compassion. But he also taught that we cannot always relieve another's suffering, no matter how much we wish to. What we can always offer is our presence, our attention, our willingness to see them as they truly are. This is the compassion that never fails, because it does not depend on outcomes. Let us explore another story that reveals more of this teaching. In a small district where the river curved around ancient willow trees, there lived a magistrate named Bo, who was known for his fairness. He had held his position for 20 years, and in that time he had judged countless disputes and crimes. He took his work seriously, studying the old legal texts, weighing evidence carefully, trying always to find the just outcome. But there was one case that troubled him more than any other. A young man named Taro had been brought before him, accused of stealing rice from a merchant's storehouse. The evidence was clear. Taro had been caught with the rice in his possession, and several witnesses had seen him leaving the storehouse at night. The punishment for theft was harsh, as it had to be to maintain order. Taro would be sent to the labor camps in the mountains for 5 years. Bo had passed such sentences many times before, but something about this case unsettled him. Taro was young, barely 20 years old, with a thin face and frightened eyes. When Bo looked at him, he did not see a hardened criminal. He saw a scared young man who had made a terrible choice. Bo postponed the sentencing, claiming he needed more time to review the evidence. But in truth, he was stalling because he did not know what to do. The law was clear. His duty was clear. Yet something in him resisted. That evening, Bo visited his old teacher, Master Hiro, who had retired to a small house at the edge of town. Hiro had once been a magistrate himself, and later a teacher of law and ethics. He was very old now, his hair white as snow, but his mind remained sharp. Bo found him in his garden, tending to a bed of winter vegetables. The old man looked up as Bo approached, and something in Bo's face made him set down his tools and gesture toward the wooden bench beside the garden wall. "You are troubled," Hiro said, sitting down beside his former student. Bo told him about Taro, about the theft, about his reluctance to pass the sentence that the law demanded. "I do not understand myself," he admitted. "I have sentenced thieves before. The law exists for good reasons. Without consequences, there would be chaos. But when I look at this young man, I cannot bring myself to send him away for 5 years. He will come back hardened and bitter if he comes back at all. And yet, what choice do I have?" Hiro listened in silence. When Bo finished, the old man did not speak right away. He looked out at his garden, at the neat rows of vegetables, at the careful order he had created. "Have you spoken with the young man?" Hiro asked finally. "Not as a magistrate, but as a person. Have you asked him why he stole the rice? The why does not matter. The law does not ask why. It only asks what was done. The law does not ask, but perhaps compassion does. Hero picked up a small stone from the ground beside the bench, turning it over in his fingers. Tell me, Bo, in all your years as a magistrate, have you ever stolen anything? Bo felt a flush of indignation. Of course not. I have lived an honest life. Have you ever been hungry? Truly hungry, so hungry that your belly cramped and your mind could think of nothing else? Bo was silent. He had grown up in a comfortable family. He had never wanted for food. Have you ever been responsible for someone who was hungry? A child, perhaps, or an elderly parent? Have you ever lain awake at night wondering how you would feed them the next day? Again, Bo could not answer. His life had been sheltered from such desperation. I am not saying that stealing is right, Hero continued gently. It is not. The merchant who was robbed has also suffered, and that suffering matters. But I am suggesting that understanding why someone does wrong can change how we respond to it. Not to excuse, but to see clearly. And seeing clearly is the beginning of true justice. Bo sat with this for a long moment. The evening light was fading, casting long shadows across the garden. But how can I do my duty if I let myself feel compassion for every criminal who comes before me? The law would fall apart. Order would collapse. Compassion does not mean letting someone escape the consequences of their actions. It means seeing them fully, as a human being, before you determine what those consequences should be. It means recognizing that in different circumstances you might have made the same choices they did. Hero set down the stone. There is a story I have often thought of. Perhaps you know it. Two monks come upon a woman drowning in a river. One monk immediately jumps in to save her, breaking the rule that monks should not touch women. The other monk is scandalized. Later, he confronts his companion about the transgression. The first monk replies, I left the woman at the riverbank. Why are you still carrying her? Bo knew the story, though he had never thought deeply about it. The point, Hero continued, is that rules exist to serve a purpose, not to be served. They are tools for creating a just society, not ends in themselves. When we apply them mechanically, without seeing the human being in front of us, we may satisfy the letter of the law while betraying its spirit. But what am I to do with Taro? The evidence is clear. He stole the rice. First, perhaps, you might find out why. Not to excuse, but to understand. Then you might consider what outcome would truly serve justice. Is it justice to send a young man to the mountains for 5 years, knowing he will likely emerge more damaged than when he went in? Or might there be another path, one that holds him accountable while also leaving room for him to become a better man? The next morning, Bo had Taro brought to his chambers, not to the formal courtroom, but to his private office. The young man entered looking terrified, expecting to hear his sentence. Sit down, Bo said, gesturing to a chair. I want to talk with you, not as your judge, but as someone who wishes to understand. Taro sat, his hands trembling in his lap. Bo looked at him for a long moment, trying to see past the crime to the person. Tell me why you took the rice, Bo said. I am not asking as a magistrate. I am asking as a man who wants to understand. Taro was silent for a moment, as if testing whether this was some kind of trap. Then, slowly, he began to speak. His father had died 2 years ago. His mother was ill and could not work. He had 2 younger sisters who depended on him. He had tried to find work, but there was little to be had, and what he found paid barely enough to survive. This winter had been hard. His mother's medicine cost more than he could earn. The rice was not for him. It was for his family, who had not eaten properly in days. Bo listened without interrupting. When Taro finished, the young man's eyes were wet with tears he was trying not to shed. "I know what I did was wrong," Taro said. "I know I must be punished. I only ask that you do not let my family starve while I am gone." Bo sat back in his chair, feeling the weight of the decision before him. The law was clear, but Hiro's words echoed in his mind. Compassion does not mean letting someone escape consequences. It means seeing them fully before you determine what those consequences should be. That afternoon, Bo delivered his judgment. Taro would not be sent to the labor camps. Instead, he would work for the merchant he had stolen from, earning back twice the value of what he had taken. During this time, he would receive a small wage to support his family. If he completed this service honestly, the matter would be closed. Some in the district criticized the decision as too lenient. Others whispered that the magistrate had grown soft. But the merchant, who had initially demanded the harshest punishment, surprised everyone by accepting the arrangement. He had seen something in the young man's face that reminded him of his own son. Perhaps he too had glimpsed the human being behind the crime. Years later, Taro became one of the most respected workers in the merchant's employ. He never stole again. When his mother recovered and his sisters grew up and married well, he often thought of the magistrate who had seen him as more than his worst act. He did not forget the wrong he had done, but he also did not forget the compassion that had allowed him to become something better. This story shows us another face of compassion. Bo the magistrate discovered that true compassion does not mean abandoning justice or ignoring wrongdoing. It means seeing the whole person, understanding their suffering without using it as an excuse, and responding in a way that serves the deeper purpose of what is right. Zen teaches us that compassion and wisdom are not opposites. They work together. Wisdom sees clearly what is so. Compassion responds with care. When Bo took the time to understand Taro's situation, he did not abandon his duty as a judge. He fulfilled it more completely. He found a path that held Taro accountable while also leaving room for healing and growth. Buddhism shows us that everyone we meet is carrying burdens we cannot see. The person who frustrates us may be dealing with grief or fear or pain that we know nothing about. This does not excuse harmful behavior, but it can soften our judgment. It can help us respond to the person rather than reacting only to their actions. The Buddha taught that we are all connected, all part of the same web of cause and effect. The suffering of one person ripples outward, affecting others in ways we may never fully understand. When Bo chose compassion over rigid punishment, he did not just change Taro's life. He changed the lives of Taro's family, of the merchant who came to trust him, of everyone that Taro would go on to help in his own life. Compassion, offered wisely, multiplies itself in ways we cannot predict. Let your body settle a little deeper now, and allow your breath to flow at its own pace. These stories will continue to unfold their meaning gently as you rest. One of the greatest barriers to compassion is the belief that we already understand. We look at another person and we think we know who they are, what they want, why they do what they do. We build a picture in our minds, and then we relate to that picture instead of to the living, breathing person in front of us. But our pictures are almost always incomplete. We see only the surface, only the parts that are visible to us from where we stand. We miss the hidden struggles, the private fears, the wounds that shaped this person long before we met them. And because we miss so much, our judgments are often wrong, sometimes terribly wrong. Zen asks us to set aside our pictures and look again, to wonder what it might be like to live inside another person's life, to face their challenges, to carry their burdens. This is not always easy. It requires us to admit that we do not know as much as we thought we did. But when we can truly see through another's eyes, something remarkable happens. The walls between us grow thin. Judgment softens into understanding. And compassion flows naturally, without effort, because we recognize in the other person something of ourselves. Let us explore a story that shows how one father discovered what he had failed to see. In a coastal town where fishing boats lined the harbor and the smell of salt hung always in the air, there lived a boat builder named Goro who had not spoken to his son in 7 years. The silence between them had grown so thick that most people in the town had forgotten they were even related. Goro worked in his boatyard on the eastern shore. His son, Ren, worked as a painter of screens and scrolls on the other side of town. They passed each other sometimes in the market or on the street, and when they did, neither acknowledged the other. It had not always been this way. When Ren was young, Goro had dreamed that his son would take over the boatyard someday. He had taught Ren to shape wood and read the grain, to understand how a hull must curve to cut through waves. Ren had shown skill with his hands, and Goro had been proud, certain that the family tradition would continue for another generation. But as Ren grew older, his interests turned elsewhere. He began spending his free time with the old painter who lived near the temple, learning to grind ink and mix colors, practicing brushstrokes late into the night. When Ren announced at 17 that he wanted to become an artist rather than a boat builder, Goro felt it as a betrayal. All those years of teaching, all those hours in the boatyard, thrown away for something as frivolous as pictures. They had argued terribly. Goro had called his son foolish and ungrateful, had accused him of wasting his life on dreams that would never feed a family. Ren had shouted back that his father had never once asked what he wanted, had only ever seen him as a pair of hands to carry on the family business. Words were said that could not be unsaid. And then Ren had left, moving to a small room across town, building his own life as a painter. In the years since, Goro had told himself that he was right. A man needed a practical trade. Art was for wealthy people with time to waste. His son would learn eventually, would come crawling back when the paintings did not sell, when hunger taught him what his father's words could not. But Ren never came back. And though Goro would never admit it, not even to himself, the silence ate at him like salt water eats at wood. Then one autumn, a great storm came. It was the worst the town had seen in decades, with waves that crashed over the harbor walls and winds that tore roofs from houses. When it was over, half the fishing fleet had been damaged or destroyed. The fishermen needed boats repaired quickly before the winter fishing season was lost, and there was more work than Goro could handle alone. His two apprentices worked beside him from dawn to dusk, but it was not enough. He needed another skilled pair of hands. And the only person in town who had learned his techniques, who understood how he worked, was the son he had not spoken to in 7 years. Goro struggled with this for days. His pride told him to manage alone, to work himself to exhaustion rather than ask anything of Ren. But the fishermen were desperate. Families depended on those boats. Finally, swallowing something bitter in his throat, he sent a message to his son asking for help. He expected Ren to refuse, or worse, to ignore the message entirely. But the next morning, Ren appeared at the boatyard gate, his painter's hands soft and pale compared to what they had once been. He said nothing beyond a simple greeting. Goro said nothing beyond a grunt of acknowledgement. They set to work. The first days were tense and silent. They worked side by side on a damaged hull, passing tools back and forth with minimal words. Goro noticed that Ren's hands remembered more than he expected. The old skills were still there, buried beneath years of holding brushes instead of chisels. But he said nothing about this. To acknowledge it would be to open a door he was not ready to open. On the 4th day, Goro cut his hand badly on a piece of splintered wood. Blood flowed freely, and he cursed and wrapped it in a rag, knowing he could not work properly until it healed. Ren, without being asked, took over the delicate task Goro had been doing, a piece of shaping work that required precision and care. Goro watched his son work. He noticed things he had not noticed before. The way Ren's eyes studied the wood before each cut, reading its grain the way he now read a blank scroll before beginning a painting. The patience in his movements, the willingness to wait until the right moment rather than forcing the material to his will. These were not the qualities of a foolish dreamer. These were the qualities of a craftsman. That evening, as the light faded and they put away their tools, Goro found himself speaking before he had decided to speak. You learned patience somewhere. You did not have it when you were young. Ren looked up, surprised to hear his father say anything beyond instructions about the work. The old painter taught me. He said that the brush cannot force the ink. It can only guide it. I spent years learning to wait, to watch, to let the image emerge rather than trying to make it happen. Goro grunted, but something in him was listening. That sounds like what my father used to say about wood. That you cannot force it. You have to work with what it wants to be. I remember him saying that. Ren's voice was quiet. I remember a lot of what I learned here. More than you might think. They stood in silence for a moment, the space between them feeling slightly different than it had before. Then Goro turned away to lock up the boatyard, and the moment passed. But something had cracked open, just slightly. Over the following days, they began to speak more, still cautiously, still mostly about the work. Goro asked about Ren's painting, the first time he had ever shown any interest. Ren described his process, the way he prepared his materials, the hours of practice that had led to his current skill. As he listened, Goro began to see something he had missed entirely 7 years ago. His son had not rejected craftsmanship. He had simply found it in a different form. One evening, Ren invited his father to see his workshop. Goro almost refused, the old stubbornness rising up. But something in him was tired of the wall between them, and he found himself agreeing. Ren's workshop was small but orderly, with brushes arranged by size and inkstones worn smooth from use. On the walls hung several finished paintings, scenes of the harbor and the hills and the boats that Goro knew so well. But seeing them through Ren's eyes, they looked different. There was a quality of attention in the brushwork, a love for the subject that Goro recognized because he felt the same love when he worked on a hull. He stood for a long time in front of a painting of a fishing boat at dawn. It was one of his boats, he realized, one he had built 15 years ago. Ren had captured something true about it, something about the way it sat in the water, the way the light caught its bow. It was not just a picture, it was a kind of understanding. "You see the boats," Goro said finally. "You really see them. I grew up seeing them, watching you build them, learning what made them beautiful." Ren paused. "I never stopped loving the work, Father. I just found a different way to do it." Goro felt something shifting in his chest, something that had been frozen for a long time beginning to thaw. He had spent 7 years believing that his son had rejected everything he valued. But standing here, surrounded by images of the life they had once shared, he saw the truth he had been too proud to notice. Ren had not turned away from his father's world. He had found his own way of honoring it. "I was wrong," Goro said, the words rough in his throat. "I did not understand. I thought you were throwing away everything I taught you, but you carried it with you. You just used it differently than I expected." Ren was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick. "I wanted you to see. I wanted you to understand why I had to do this. But you were so angry, and I was too proud to explain. We are alike in that, at least." Goro almost smiled. Too proud for our own good. They did not embrace or weep or make grand declarations. That was not who they were. But something had changed between them, something that would continue to change in the months and years to come. Goro had finally seen his son, not as a disappointment or a failure, but as a man who had followed his own path with skill and dedication. And in seeing Ren clearly, his judgment had dissolved into something softer, something that felt like compassion for the young man who had struggled alone all these years, wanting only his father's understanding. This story shows us how much we can miss when we are certain we already know. Goro spent 7 years convinced that he understood his son's choice, that Ren had rejected everything that mattered. But he was relating to a picture in his mind rather than to his actual son. It was only when circumstances forced them together, when he had to actually watch Ren work and listen to him speak, that the picture cracked and he could see what was really there. Zen teaches us that our ideas about things are not the same as the things themselves. We build concepts and categories, and then we mistake them for reality. This is perhaps most painful when we do it with people we love. We decide who someone is, and then we stop seeing them. We argue with our image of them, instead of with the person actually standing in front of us. Compassion requires us to set aside our pictures again and again and look with fresh eyes. It asks us to admit that we do not fully know another person's experience, no matter how long we have known them. This humility is not weakness. It is the doorway through which real understanding can enter. The Buddha taught that all beings suffer, each in their own way. When we remember this, it becomes harder to hold on to our judgments. The person who frustrates us is suffering. The person who disappoints us is suffering. Even the person who hurts us is suffering in ways we may never fully understand. This does not excuse harmful behavior. but it can soften our hearts enough to allow compassion in. Let us explore another story that reveals more of this teaching. In a prosperous city known for its silk trade, there lived a rice merchant named Cho, who had built his fortune through sharp dealing and careful calculation. His warehouses were always full. His scales were always precise, though some whispered they tilted slightly in his favor. He lived in a fine house with painted screens and a garden of carefully raked stones, and he looked upon the poor with a mixture of pity and disdain. Cho believed that poverty was a kind of failure. The poor were lazy or foolish or lacking in the discipline needed to succeed. He had started with nothing. After all, just a small inheritance from his father and a willingness to work. If he could rise, anyone could. Those who remained in poverty had simply not tried hard enough. He was generous in a certain way. He gave rice to the temple to be distributed to the hungry, and he took satisfaction in the gratitude of the monks who received his donations. But he gave from a distance. He never actually visited the parts of the city where the poor lived, never spoke with them or learned their names. They were an abstraction to him, a mass of unfortunate people whose suffering was regrettable, but ultimately their own responsibility. Then came the year of the Great Flood. The river that had made the city wealthy rose higher than anyone could remember, breaking through barriers and sweeping away everything in its path. Cho's warehouses were on low ground near the docks, and the water took them all, every sack of rice, every carefully counted grain. The flood also took his fine house, filling it with mud and debris until it was unlivable. In a single night, Cho went from one of the wealthiest men in the city to someone with nothing but the clothes on his back. His family was safe, having fled to higher ground before the waters reached them. But they had nowhere to go. The other merchants, with whom Cho had competed fiercely for years, offered sympathy but little practical help. His fine friends from the tea houses and pleasure quarters suddenly became unavailable. Cho discovered that wealth had bought him acquaintances, not friends. With no other choice, he took his wife and young daughter to the only place that would have them, the relief camp that had been set up on the temple grounds, where hundreds of displaced families were crowding together under makeshift shelters. These were the very people Cho had looked down upon all his life. Now he was one of them. The first weeks were humiliating. Cho was not used to waiting in line for food, not used to sleeping on thin mats in a crowded hall where the sounds and smells of other people's lives pressed in from all sides. He was not used to having nothing, to being unable to provide for his family, to feeling the pity of others directed at himself. He kept to himself at first, speaking to no one, preserving what little pride he had left. He told himself that this was temporary, that he would rebuild, that soon he would be back in his fine house, looking down on these unfortunate people from a comfortable distance. But the days passed, and the rebuilding did not happen. The other merchants had claimed the best opportunities. Cho had no capital, no connections anymore, no way to start again. One evening, as Cho sat alone at the edge of the camp, staring at the mud-stained city he no longer recognized, an old woman sat down beside him. She was thin and weathered, with hands that showed decades of hard work. He had seen her in the food lines, always near the back, always giving part of her portion to the children nearby. "You are the rice merchant," she said. It was not a question. Cho nodded stiffly, expecting mockery or resentment. He had not been kind to people like this woman when he was powerful. He had driven hard bargains and turned away those who could not pay. But the old woman just looked at him with calm, curious eyes. "You look like a man who has lost more than his warehouse." Something in her voice, a gentleness he had not expected, made Cho answer honestly. "I have lost everything. My rice, my house, my position. I thought I knew how the world worked. I thought if I was clever and hard-working, I would always be safe. Now I see that I was just lucky, and the luck has run out." The old woman nodded slowly. "That is a hard lesson. But it is a true one. We like to believe that we earn our place in the world, that we deserve what we have. It makes us feel safe. But the flood does not care about deserving. It takes what it takes." "How do you bear it?" Cho asked, and he was surprised to find that he genuinely wanted to know. "You have lived this way for years, I assume. How do you survive without going mad?" The old woman smiled, and there was something in her smile that Cho did not expect, a kind of peace that seemed impossible given her circumstances. "I have not always been poor. Many years ago, before you were born, I was the wife of a silk dealer. We had a house and servants and more food than we could eat. Then my husband died young, and his brother took the business, and I found myself with nothing. I was angry for a long time. I believed I deserved better, that life had cheated me." She paused, watching a group of children playing in the mud nearby, their laughter rising up in the evening air. "But slowly I learned something. Happiness does not come from having things. It comes from how we meet each day, whatever that day brings. The people here, the ones you have been avoiding, they have taught me more about generosity and courage than I ever learned in my fine house. They share what little they have. They help each other without keeping score. They know that we are all just passing through, and that kindness is the only thing we can truly give." Cho listened, and something in him began to shift. He had spent his life measuring everything, calculating profit and loss, keeping track of who owed him and what he was owed. But this old woman was describing a different way of being in the world, one where the keeping of accounts fell away. "I look down on people like you," he admitted, the words painful to say. "I thought you were poor because you had failed, because you had not worked hard enough or planned well enough. I see now that I was wrong." "You were not seeing clearly," the old woman agreed. "But that is not a crime. Most people do not see clearly. We believe what makes us comfortable. It is only when life breaks us open that we can see what was always true." In the weeks that followed, Cho began to participate in the life of the camp. He helped distribute food instead of just receiving it. He listened to people's stories, learning how they had come to be here, what they had lost, what they still hoped for. He met a fisherman whose boat had been his only possession, who now carved toys for children to bring in a few coins. He met a widow with 4 children who worked from before dawn until after dark, washing clothes for those who could pay just to keep her family fed. He met a young man with a twisted leg who had never had the chance that Cho had taken for granted. Each person he met complicated his simple picture of poverty. These were not lazy people who had failed to try. They were people who had faced obstacles he had never imagined, who had made difficult choices he had never had to make, who worked harder than he ever had for rewards far smaller. His judgment, which had once seemed so clear and righteous, began to dissolve in the face of all these individual stories. Eventually, Cho did rebuild, though never to his former heights. He opened a small shop with money borrowed from the temple and slowly paid it back. He dealt fairly now, his scales truly balanced, and he kept a portion of his rice to distribute to those who could not pay. When people asked why he had changed, he would speak of the flood, of the camp, of the old woman who had sat beside him when he had nothing. "I thought I understood poverty," he would say. "But I was looking from too far away. When I came close, when I lived it myself and listened to those who had always lived it, I saw how wrong I had been. It is easy to judge from a distance. It is harder to judge when you know someone's name, when you have heard their story, when you have seen how hard they struggle against winds you have never had to face." Years later, when the old woman from the camp finally passed away, Cho was there. He had visited her regularly over the years, bringing food and medicine and company. At the end, he held her hand and thanked her for the lesson she had given him when he had nothing. "You taught me to see," he told her. "You taught me that compassion begins with understanding, and understanding begins with getting close enough to really look." This story shows us how distance feeds judgment, while closeness feeds compassion. Cho had spent his life forming opinions about the poor from far away, and those opinions had been harsh and simple. It was only when he lost everything and found himself among them that he could see how wrong he had been. Buddhism teaches us that all beings are interconnected, that the lines we draw between ourselves and others are ultimately illusory. The rich man and the poor woman are not as separate as they appear. They are both subject to the same uncertainties, the same floods and famines and turns of fortune. When Cho lost his wealth, he discovered that he was not so different from those he had judged. The same fears, the same hopes, the same need for kindness and connection lived in him as in them. Zen shows us that our judgments say more about us than about the people we judge. When we look down on someone, we are often protecting ourselves from the fear that we could be in their place. When we dismiss another person's struggle, we are often avoiding the uncomfortable truth that life is uncertain, and we are not as in control as we like to believe. True compassion requires us to face these truths, to admit our own vulnerability, and to recognize that we are all in this together. The Buddha taught loving kindness as a practice, a deliberate turning of the heart toward care for all beings. But this practice is not just about generating warm feelings. It is about seeing clearly. When we truly see another person, when we understand something of what they have faced and what they carry, loving kindness arises naturally. It is the heart's response to recognition, to the sudden awareness that this stranger is not so strange after all. Let your breath deepen gently now, and allow your body to soften into stillness. The understanding that grows from these stories continues to work quietly within, even as you rest. There is a kind of helping that does not truly help. We have all experienced it, perhaps from both sides. Someone cares for us, but their caring comes with strings attached. They want us to change in a particular way, to follow the path they have chosen for us, to become the person they think we should be. Their love is real, but it is wrapped around a need to control. This is one of the subtlest traps on the path of compassion. We genuinely want to help. We see someone struggling, and we long to ease their burden. But somewhere along the way, our helping becomes about us, about our need to be useful, our vision of what is best, our inability to let someone walk their own path even when it leads through difficulty. True compassion offers without demanding. It gives without keeping score. It helps where help is wanted and steps back when stepping back is what is needed. This kind of compassion requires a deep trust that others have their own wisdom, their own timing, their own journey that we cannot walk for them no matter how much we might wish to. Zen teaches us to hold things lightly, to offer our gifts with open hands rather than grasping fingers. This is as true of our care for others as it is of anything else. We can love deeply and still let go. We can help fully and still respect another's freedom to choose their own way. Let us explore a story that shows how one woman learned the difference between caring and controlling. In a village at the foot of a mountain where cherry trees bloomed each spring, there lived a woman named May who had devoted herself to caring for her aging mother. May's father had died when she was young, and her mother had raised her alone, working long hours as a seamstress to provide for them both. Now her mother was old and frail, her eyesight failing, her hands too unsteady to hold a needle. It was May's turn to provide, and she did so with fierce dedication. She had moved back into her childhood home when her mother's health began to decline. She cooked every meal, cleaned every room, washed every piece of clothing. She helped her mother bathe and dress. She arranged the cushions just so, kept the fire at exactly the right temperature, made sure the tea was always perfectly brewed. Nothing was too much trouble. Nothing was left to chance. But lately, something had shifted between them. Her mother, once grateful for May's attention, had grown quiet and withdrawn. She no longer smiled when May brought her meals. She no longer chatted about the old days or asked about May's life. She sat by the window for hours, looking out at the cherry trees, saying little. May told herself that this was just the sadness of old age, the natural dimming that came when the body began to fail. She responded by trying even harder, anticipating every need before it was expressed, hovering always nearby in case something was wanted. But the more she did, the more her mother seemed to retreat. One afternoon, May was arranging flowers in a vase by her mother's bed when the old woman spoke suddenly, her voice sharper than May had heard it in months. "I want to go outside." May looked up, surprised. "Outside? But it is cold today, Mother. You might catch a chill. Let me bring you another blanket instead." "I do not want a blanket. I want to go outside. I want to feel the air on my face and smell the cherry blossoms." "The cherry blossoms are not blooming yet. It is still too early. In a few weeks, when it warms up, I will take you to see them. In a few weeks, I may be dead." The words hung in the air between them. Her mother's eyes, clouded with age but still sharp with feeling, met May's. "I am old. I do not have endless weeks to wait for your permission." May felt as if she had been slapped. "I am only trying to protect you. I am only trying to take care of you. You are trying to control me." Her mother's voice was tired now, the flash of sharpness fading. "You decide when I eat and what I eat. You decide when I sleep and when I wake. You decide whether I can go outside or must stay in. I have become a child in my own home, with no say in how I live my final days." May stood frozen, the flowers forgotten in her hands. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, to explain that everything she did was out of love. But something in her mother's words had struck a place she could not ignore. "I am trying to keep you safe," she said, her voice smaller now. I know, and I love you for it. But safety is not the only thing that matters. Dignity matters too. Choice matters. Feeling like a person and not a problem to be managed. Her mother reached out and took May's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. I know my body is failing. I know I cannot do what I once did. But I am still here, inside this old shell. I still have wishes and preferences, and a will of my own. When you take all of that away, when you decide everything for me, you leave me with nothing but waiting to die. May sank down onto the bed beside her mother, tears rising in her eyes. She had thought she was being a good daughter. She had thought her constant care was a gift. But now she saw it from another angle, saw how her helping had become a kind of cage. I did not mean to do this, she whispered. I only wanted to make things easier for you. I know. Her mother squeezed her hand. Your heart is good, but sometimes love holds too tightly. Sometimes we must loosen our grip to let the other person breathe. That evening, despite May's worry, she helped her mother put on a warm coat and walk slowly out to the garden. The air was cold, and the cherry trees were still bare, their branches dark against the grey sky. But her mother stood there for a long time, breathing deeply, looking up at the branches with something like joy on her face. I can smell it coming, she said. The spring. It is still weeks away, but I can feel it in the air. May stood beside her, resisting the urge to suggest they go back inside, fighting the anxiety that rose in her chest at every cold gust of wind. This was hard for her, she realized. Letting her mother take a risk, even a small one. Letting her mother choose, even when the choice seemed unwise. I am sorry, May said. I did not see what I was doing. Her mother patted her arm. You see it now. That is what matters. In the weeks that followed, May practiced a different kind of caring. She still cooked and cleaned and helped with bathing. But she asked more and decided less. Would you like rice or noodles tonight? Do you want to sit by the window or by the fire? She bit her tongue when her mother chose things that worried her, learning to trust that her mother knew her own needs better than May did. It was not easy. Every time her mother wanted to do something that seemed risky, May felt the old urge to step in and prevent it. But she was learning that there was a difference between caring for someone and taking over their life. She was learning that love sometimes meant stepping back, making space, allowing the other person to be fully themselves, even when it frightened her. Her mother bloomed in this new space. She began to speak more, to smile more, to engage with life again. She even took up a small amount of sewing, just simple repairs, her fingers remembering their old skill even if they could no longer manage fine work. She was still old and frail, still declining day by day. But there was a light in her eyes that had been missing, a sense of presence that May had unknowingly smothered with her constant care. One spring morning, the cherry trees finally bloomed. May helped her mother walk out to stand beneath them, the pink petals drifting down like snow. Her mother lifted her face to the blossoms, smiling with a peace that made May's heart ache. Thank you, her mother said. Thank you for letting me live while I am still alive. May understood then what her mother had been trying to teach her. Love was not about keeping someone safe from all harm. It was about honoring their wholeness, their right to make choices, their dignity as a person with their own path to walk. Sometimes the most loving thing she could do was to step aside and let her mother be herself, even when being herself meant taking risks that May would never have chosen. When her mother died later that year, peacefully in her sleep on a warm summer night, May grieved deeply. But she did not grieve with regret. Those last months had been full of real connection, of laughter and conversation and shared moments beneath the cherry trees. Her mother had lived fully until the end, not just survived. And that, May realized, was the greatest gift she could have given. This story shows us how compassion can become entangled with control. May's love for her mother was genuine and deep, but it had grown around a need to manage everything, to keep her mother safe even at the cost of her mother's dignity and agency. It was only when her mother spoke honestly about what this felt like that May could see the cage she had built from her own good intentions. Zen teaches us that attachment causes suffering, and this includes attachment to our way of helping. When we become fixed on a particular outcome, when we insist that our help must look a certain way or produce a certain result, we lose touch with what is actually needed. We start serving our own vision instead of the person in front of us. Buddhism shows us that each person has their own path, their own karma, their own lessons to learn. We cannot live someone else's life for them, no matter how much we love them. We can offer support, presence, assistance when it is wanted, but we must also leave room for the other person to choose, to struggle, to find their own way. This is not abandonment. It is respect. The Buddha taught that true compassion is free from clinging. It gives without needing anything in return, helps without demanding that the help be received in a particular way, loves without requiring that the loved one become someone other than who they are. This kind of compassion is rare and precious. It asks us to loosen our grip on outcomes and trust in something larger than our own plans. Let us explore another story that reveals more of this teaching. In a town known for its school, there lived a teacher named Sho who cared deeply about his students. He had been teaching for nearly 20 years, and in that time, he had seen many young people pass through his classroom. Some were eager to learn, some were reluctant, some were brilliant, some struggled. He did his best to reach all of them, to find the key that would unlock each student's potential. But there was one student who troubled him more than any other. His name was Tomo, a boy of 15 with quick eyes and a restless spirit. Tomo was clearly intelligent, perhaps the brightest student Sho had ever taught. But he refused to apply himself. He sat in the back of the classroom, staring out the window. He turned in work that was careless and incomplete. He seemed determined to waste the gifts that had been given to him. Sho took this personally. He saw in Tomo a reflection of his own youth, when a patient teacher had recognized his potential and pushed him to develop it. Without that teacher, Sho believed, he would never have become who he was. He wanted to be that teacher for Tomo, to reach through the boy's resistance and ignite the spark he knew was there. He tried everything. He gave Tomo extra attention, staying after class to work with him, assigning special projects designed to engage his interests. He praised the flashes of brilliance that occasionally appeared in the boy's work. He spoke to him seriously about his future, about the opportunities he was throwing away. He even visited Tomo's home to speak with his parents, trying to enlist them in the effort to turn the boy around. But nothing worked. The more Sho pushed, the more Tomo withdrew. The special attention seemed to make him uncomfortable. The extra projects went uncompleted. The serious talks about the future were met with shrugs and silence. It was as if Sho's very effort to help was driving Tomo further away. One evening, frustrated and discouraged, Sho visited an old teacher named Master Kira, who had taught at the school decades ago, before retiring to a small cottage at the edge of town. Kira was known for his wisdom about young people, and Sho hoped he might have some insight that could help. He found Kira in his garden, pruning an old plum tree with careful attention. The evening light was golden, and the sound of birds filled the air. Kira listened without interrupting as Sho described his struggle with Tomo. When Sho finished, Kira set down his pruning shears and looked at him thoughtfully. "You care very much about this boy. I see so much potential in him. It breaks my heart to watch him waste it. And you believe that if you just try hard enough, you can save him from himself." Sho hesitated. Put that way, it sounded presumptuous. But he nodded. "Yes, I believe I can reach him if I find the right way." Kira walked over to a bench beside the garden path and sat down, gesturing for Sho to join him. "Let me tell you about a student I once had. Many years ago, when I was young and certain that good teaching could fix any problem." He paused, his eyes distant with memory. "There was a boy in my class who reminded me of myself at that age. Bright, curious, full of promise. But he was also angry and resistant, fighting against everything and everyone. I was determined to save him. I gave him all my attention, all my energy. I saw him as my special project, the student who would prove what a great teacher I was. What happened? He withdrew completely. The more I pushed, the more he pulled away. Eventually, he stopped coming to school altogether. I was devastated. I had failed him, I thought. If only I had been more skilled, more patient, more something, I could have reached him." Kira picked a leaf from the bench beside him, turning it over in his weathered hands. "Years later, I met him again. He was a grown man by then, a carpenter with a wife and children. He was happy. He had found his own way, in his own time. So he turned out well despite everything? Not despite everything. Because of his own journey, which was never mine to control." Kira looked at Sho directly. "He told me something that day that I have never forgotten. He said that my attention had felt like a weight. Every time I singled him out, praised him, pushed him, he felt the pressure of my expectations. He was not ready for what I wanted to give him. He needed time, space, room to find his own reasons for learning. My help, well-intentioned as it was, had become an obstacle." Sho felt something uncomfortable stirring in his chest. He thought of all the extra attention he had lavished on Tomo, all the special projects and serious talks. Had he been helping, or had he been adding to the boy's burden? "But what am I supposed to do?" he asked. "Just give up on him? Stop trying to help?" Giving up and letting go are not the same thing. Kira set down the leaf and looked at Sho with kind eyes. "You can still teach him, still be available, still offer what you have to offer. But you must release your grip on the outcome. You must allow him to receive your teaching or not, in his own way and his own time. You are not responsible for saving him. That is a weight too heavy for any teacher to carry. But what if he fails? What if he wastes his potential? That is his choice to make, not yours. He may fail now and succeed later. He may take a path you cannot imagine, or he may indeed waste what he has. You cannot control this. You can only offer your gift with open hands and trust that something larger is at work. Kira paused, then added gently, "Sometimes the most helpful thing we can do is to step back, to make space, to trust that the other person has their own wisdom, their own timing, their own path. This is not abandonment. It is respect." Sho sat with these words for a long time. They went against everything he believed about teaching, about caring, about what it meant to help. But something in them rang true. He thought of how Tomo's eyes went flat whenever Sho singled him out, how the boy seemed to shrink under the weight of attention. Perhaps Kira was right. Perhaps Sho's very effort to reach him was pushing him away. In the weeks that followed, Sho tried something different. He did not stop caring about Tomo, but he stopped showing it so obviously. He treated the boy the same as other students, offering the same instruction, the same opportunities, the same quiet respect. He did not single him out for special attention. He did not stay after class to work with him. He did not visit his home or speak with his parents. At first, nothing changed. Tomo continued to sit in the back, staring out the window, producing careless work. Sho had to fight the urge to intervene, to go back to his old ways. But he held himself back, remembering Kira's words about open hands and trusting something larger. Then, slowly, something shifted. Without the weight of Sho's expectations pressing on him, Tomo seemed to relax slightly. He began to listen during lessons, though he tried to hide it. His work improved marginally, then a little more. He asked a question one day, the first he had ever asked in class, and Sho answered it simply, without making a fuss, without letting the boy see how much hope that single question had kindled. The change was gradual and incomplete. Tomo did not transform into a model student. He still struggled, still resisted, still wasted much of his potential. But there was an opening now that had not been there before. A space where something might grow, in its own time, in its own way. Years later, Sho heard that Tomo had become a fisherman, working on a boat with his uncle. It was not the future Sho would have chosen for him. All that intelligence, all that potential, devoted to hauling nets and reading the weather. But the person who told him this also said that Tomo seemed content, that he had found a place where he belonged. Sho thought about this for a long time. He had wanted so much to shape Tomo's path, to guide him toward the future that Sho could see for him. But Tomo had found his own way, different from anything Sho had imagined. Perhaps that was how it was meant to be. Perhaps the teacher's job was not to control the outcome, but simply to offer the teaching and let it land where it would. He remembered Kira's words about open hands, about trusting something larger. He still did not fully understand what that larger thing was, but he was learning to trust it, slowly, one student at a time. This story shows us another face of compassion without grasping. Sho's care for Tomo was genuine, but it had become entangled with his own need to save the boy, to prove something about his teaching, to see a particular outcome unfold. When he learned to step back, to offer his gift without demanding it be received, something opened that his effort had been blocking. Zen teaches us that we cannot force a flower to bloom. We can provide water and sunlight, good soil, and protection from harsh winds. But the blooming itself happens in its own time, according to its own nature. This is true of flowers, And it is true of people. Our help can create conditions for growth, but we cannot make the growth happen. Buddhism shows us that attachment to outcomes creates suffering, both for ourselves and for those we are trying to help. When we insist that our help must produce a specific result, we put pressure on the other person to become what we want them to be. This pressure, however well-intentioned, can be a burden rather than a gift. True compassion offers freely and lets go of what happens next. The Buddha taught that all beings must walk their own path to awakening. A teacher can point the way, can offer guidance and support, but cannot do the walking for anyone else. This is both humbling and liberating. We are not responsible for outcomes that were never ours to control. We can do our best, offer our gifts, and then release our grip, trusting that each person has their own journey to make. Let your body settle more deeply now, and allow your breath to find its own gentle rhythm. There is nothing you need to hold on to in this moment. It is easy to feel compassion for those we love, for those who are kind to us, for those whose suffering moves us naturally. But what about the difficult ones? The person who wronged us, the neighbor who spreads unkind words, the family member who hurt us deeply and never apologized. Can compassion reach even there? Zen Buddhism does not ask us to pretend that harm did not happen, or to excuse behavior that caused real pain. But it does invite us to look beneath the surface of those who have hurt us. Every person who causes harm is also suffering. Hurt people, as the old saying goes. This does not make their actions acceptable, but it can help us understand them, and understanding is the doorway through which compassion can enter even the most guarded heart. When we hold on to anger and resentment, we often believe we are punishing the one who wronged us. But in truth, we are carrying a weight that burdens only ourselves. The other person may have moved on entirely, unaware of the bitterness we tend like a secret garden. Our unforgiveness becomes our own prison, not theirs. Compassion for the difficult is not about them. It is about us. It is about setting down a weight we were never meant to carry. It is about freeing ourselves from the grip of old pain so that we can live more fully in the present. Let us explore a story that shows how one woman found her way to this unexpected freedom. In a village nestled between two hills where apricot trees grew wild along the roads, there lived a woman named Nori, who carried a bitterness she had tended for 15 years. When she was young, her family had owned a small but prosperous pottery business, passed down through 3 generations. They made simple, beautiful bowls and cups that were sold throughout the region. Nori had grown up expecting to inherit this business someday, to carry on the tradition her grandparents had begun. But when Nori was 20, a woman named Sana had come to work for them. Sana was skilled and charming, and Nori's father had trusted her completely. Over 2 years, Sana had slowly stolen from the business, skimming money, selling pieces secretly, manipulating the accounts. By the time the theft was discovered, there was not enough left to recover. The business had to be sold. Nori's father, shamed and heartbroken, had never fully recovered. He died 5 years later, and Nori had always believed the betrayal had hastened his death. Sana had disappeared after the theft was discovered, moving to another district where no one knew her history. Nori had heard rumors over the years that Sana had married, had children, was living a comfortable life. The injustice of this burned in her. While her father had withered away, while her family had struggled to rebuild, The woman who had destroyed them was thriving. Nori built a life for herself, marrying a good man, raising children, finding work as a seamstress. From the outside, she appeared content. But inside, a hard knot of anger lived in her chest, pulsing quietly beneath everything she did. When she lay awake at night, she would find herself rehearsing what she would say if she ever met Sana again. The words she would use to wound. The truths she would force Sana to face. In her imagination, Sana would weep with remorse, would beg for forgiveness that Nori would never grant. Then one autumn, 15 years after the betrayal, Nori traveled to a distant town for her niece's wedding. The celebration was joyful, full of music and food, and the laughter of family she rarely saw. But on the second day, as Nori walked through the market looking for a gift to bring home to her children, she saw a face she recognized instantly, even after all these years. Sana was sitting on a low stool outside a modest house, shelling beans into a wooden bowl. She looked older, of course, her hair grey now, her face lined, but it was unmistakably her. The woman who had destroyed Nori's family was right there, close enough to touch. Nori stopped walking. Her heart pounded. All those imagined confrontations rose up in her mind, all the cutting words she had rehearsed. Now was her chance. Now she could finally say everything she had been carrying for 15 years. But as she stood there, frozen in the middle of the dusty street, she noticed something she had not expected. Sana's hands, shelling the beans, were trembling. Not with age, but with something else. And when Sana looked up, as if sensing someone watching her, Nori saw her eyes clearly for the first time. They were the eyes of someone who had known suffering. Deep suffering, the kind that leaves marks that never fully fade. For a long moment, the two women looked at each other. Nori saw recognition dawn in Sana's face, saw fear flicker there, and then something else. Something like resignation. Sana did not run or hide. She simply sat there, waiting for whatever would come. Nori walked forward. Her legs carried her without conscious decision. She stopped in front of Sana, close enough now to see the patches on her worn clothing, the roughness of her hands, the thinness of her frame. This was not the comfortable life the rumors had described. "You know who I am," Nori said. It was not a question. Sana nodded slowly. "I have thought of you often, of your father, of what I did." Her voice was quiet, without defense or excuse. "I have no words that could undo it. My father died believing he had failed his family. He never recovered from what you did." Sana closed her eyes briefly, as if absorbing a blow. "I know. I heard. Years later. I am sorry. I know that means nothing, but I am sorry." Nori had imagined this moment so many times, had pictured Sana defiant or dismissive, had rehearsed her own righteous anger. But the woman in front of her was not defiant. She was broken. Something had broken her long ago, perhaps even before she had stolen from Nori's family. "Why did you do it?" Nori asked. The question came out softer than she had intended. Sana was quiet for a long moment. Her hands had stopped shelling the beans, resting still in her lap. "I was desperate. My mother was ill, and the treatments cost more than we could afford. My brother had gambling debts, and the men he owed money to were threatening our family. I told myself I would only take a little, just enough to get through the crisis. But a little became more, and more became everything. By the end, I did not recognize myself anymore. She looked up at Nori, and there were tears on her weathered cheeks. I am not asking you to forgive me. What I did was unforgivable. I stole your family's livelihood. I broke your father's heart. I have lived with that knowledge every day since. There has not been a morning when I did not wake up remembering. Nori stood there, feeling the anger she had carried for so long churning in her chest. Part of her wanted to unleash it, to make Sana feel a fraction of the pain she had caused. But another part of her was looking at this broken woman and seeing something she had never allowed herself to see before. She was seeing a human being who had made terrible choices and had paid for them in her own way. Your life has not been easy, Nori observed quietly. Sana shook her head. My husband left me when he learned about my past. My son died young in an accident. My daughter will not speak to me. I have nothing now but this small room and the kindness of neighbors who do not know what I once did. She paused. I do not say this to ask for pity. I say it because you should know that I did not escape. I have been living in a prison of my own making for 15 years. Something shifted in Nori's chest. The hard knot of anger that had lived there for so long did not disappear, but it loosened slightly. She looked at Sana and saw not a villain but a person, complicated and flawed and suffering. It did not excuse what Sana had done. It did not bring back Nori's father or the family business, but it changed something in how Nori held the story. She realized, standing there in that dusty street, that she had a choice. She could hold on to her anger, could curse this woman and walk away with the bitter satisfaction of having delivered her judgment. Or she could set down the weight she had been carrying, not for Sana's sake, but for her own. I cannot forgive you, Nori said finally. I am not sure I know how. What you did caused too much pain. Sana nodded, accepting this. But I am tired of carrying this anger. I am tired of letting what you did poison my days. I am going to try to let it go, not because you deserve it, but because I do. She turned and walked away without looking back. Her heart was still pounding, her thoughts still churning. But beneath the turmoil, she felt something she had not felt in 15 years. A lightness. A sense of space where the bitterness had been. In the months that followed, Nori found that the anger returned sometimes, rising up unexpectedly when she was tired or sad. But it had lost some of its power. She had seen the face of the woman she hated, had heard her story, had witnessed her suffering. Sana was no longer a monster in her mind. She was a person who had done monstrous things, yes, but also a person who had paid for them and would continue paying until she died. This did not make what happened acceptable, but it made it possible to hold differently. Nori found that she could think of her father now without the bitterness that had always accompanied the memory. She could remember the good years, the years before the betrayal, without the shadow of what came after darkening everything. She never saw Sana again. She did not need to. What had happened between them in that brief encounter was not about Sana. It was about Nori, finally allowing herself to set down a burden that had been weighing on her for half her life. This story shows us that compassion for those who have harmed us is not about excusing what they did. Nori did not forgive Sana, and she did not need to. Forgiveness is a gift that cannot be demanded or forced. But she did something equally important. She allowed herself to see Sana as a human being, suffering in her own way, trapped in her own prison. This seeing loosened the grip of Nori's anger and allowed her to begin letting it go. Zen teaches us that holding on to resentment is like grasping a burning coal. We think we are waiting to throw it at someone else, but we are the ones being burned. When we can see the humanity in those who have hurt us, when we can recognize their suffering even as we acknowledge our own, something releases. We do not do this for them. We do it for ourselves. Buddhism shows us that everyone is caught in the web of cause and effect, acting out of their own wounds and confusions and desperate needs. The person who harmed us was once a child, was shaped by forces beyond their control, was doing what seemed necessary at the time, even if it was terribly wrong. This does not excuse their actions, but it places those actions in a larger context that can soften our rigid judgment. The Buddha taught that hatred never ceases by hatred, but only by love. This does not mean we must feel warm affection for those who have wronged us. It means that we must find a way to release the hatred that binds us to them, to free ourselves from the prison of our own resentment. This is compassion directed inward, toward our own suffering, and it is sometimes the most difficult compassion of all. Let us explore another story that reveals more of this teaching. In a town where craftsmen of all kinds had their workshops along the river, there lived a potter named Jin and a carpenter named Haku who had been bitter rivals for as long as anyone could remember. Their workshops stood side by side on a narrow lane near the water, and the proximity that should have made them neighbors had instead made them enemies. The feud had begun over something small, so many years ago that neither man remembered it clearly anymore. Perhaps it was a dispute over the boundary between their properties, or an unkind word spoken in the heat of frustration, or a customer who had chosen one man's work over the other's. Whatever the original cause, it had grown over the years like a weed, fed by small slights and imagined insults until it filled the space between them completely. They did not speak to each other. When they passed on the lane, they looked away. When a customer praised one man's work, the other would find something dismissive to say. Their wives, who might have been friends in different circumstances, had absorbed their husband's animosity and kept their distance too. Even their children had learned to regard the neighbor family as enemies, though none of them could have explained exactly why. Jin told himself that Haku was arrogant and dishonest, that he had cheated him years ago in a deal neither of them could quite remember. Haku told himself that Jin was petty and jealous, that he had spread lies about Haku's work to steal his customers. Each man had built a story about the other, and each story had hardened into certainty over the years. Then came the spring, when the river flooded worse than it had in a generation. The water rose through the night, silent and relentless, and by morning both workshops were underwater. Jin woke to find his kilns destroyed, his stored clay ruined, years of finished work swept away. Haku woke to find his tools scattered, his wood supply rotting, his workshop floor covered in thick mud. Both men stood in the ruins of their livelihoods, stunned by the scale of the destruction. Other craftsmen along the river had suffered too, and in the days that followed, the town came together to help with the recovery. Space was found for those who had lost their workshops. Materials were shared, hands were offered to help with the cleanup. But there was not enough space for everyone. The town hall, which was being used as temporary shelter for displaced workshops, could only accommodate so many. When the official in charge of assignments realized that Jin and Haku had both lost everything, he made what he thought was a practical decision. they would share a space. Their skills were different enough that they would not compete for the same tools, and they had worked next to each other for decades. Surely they could manage to share a room for a few months while their workshops were rebuilt. Neither man wanted to object publicly and reveal the depth of their feud, so they agreed through gritted teeth. And so Jin the potter and Haku the carpenter found themselves working in the same small room, separated only by a thin line painted on the floor. The first days were miserable. They worked in rigid silence, each pretending the other did not exist. When Jin's elbow crossed the painted line while he wedged clay, Haku would clear his throat pointedly. When sawdust from Haku's work drifted into Jin's space, Jin would sweep it back with exaggerated annoyance. The tension in that small room was thick enough to taste. But they could not maintain this coldness forever. They were working long hours in close quarters, struggling with the same challenges, facing the same uncertainty about whether they could rebuild before their savings ran out. And slowly, despite themselves, cracks began to appear in the wall between them. It started with small practicalities. Jin needed a piece of wood to repair a tool handle, and Haku had scraps to spare. Haku needed a container for a stain he was mixing, and Jin had a cracked pot that would serve. These exchanges happened without words at first, items left at the painted line like offerings, taken without acknowledgement. But over time, a nod was added, then a grunt of thanks. Then, one day, an actual word. One evening, after the others who shared the hall had gone home, Jin and Haku found themselves working late, the only ones remaining. Jin was struggling with his makeshift wheel, which wobbled badly and ruined everything he tried to throw. His frustration mounted until finally he let out a curse and slammed his hand against the table. Haku looked up from his work. For a long moment, he just watched. Then, without saying anything, he walked over to Jin's side of the line, knelt down, and examined the wheel. His carpenter's eyes saw immediately what was wrong, a problem with the base that Jin's potter's hands had no idea how to fix. "I can fix this," Haku said. "If you want." Jin stared at him, years of animosity warring with the desperate need to get his wheel working. Need one. He nodded. Haku worked for an hour, adjusting and reinforcing and balancing. When he was done, the wheel spun true and smooth, better than it had in years. Jin tried it, throwing a simple bowl, feeling the difference immediately. "Thank you," he said. The words felt strange in his mouth, directed at this man he had hated for so long. Haku nodded and returned to his side of the line. But something had shifted between them. In the weeks that followed, more cracks appeared. Haku admired a glaze Jin had developed, the deep blue of a winter sky. Jin noticed the elegance of a joint Haku had carved, the way two pieces of wood became one without visible seam. They began to talk, cautiously at first, about techniques and materials and the challenges of their crafts. They discovered that they shared more than they had ever allowed themselves to see. One night, over cups of tea that Jin had brewed, Haku asked the question that had been hovering between them. "Why did we hate each other for so long? I cannot even remember how it started." Jin shook his head slowly. "Neither can I." "Not really. There was something about a boundary marker, I think. Or maybe a customer. It was so long ago. We wasted so many years. We could have been friends, or at least friendly neighbors. Instead, we spent our energy on this foolish war. Haku's voice held regret, and something else too. A kind of wonder at how stubborn they had both been. I think we each needed an enemy, Jin said slowly, the words forming as he spoke. Someone to blame when things went wrong. Someone to be better than. It is easier to feel sure of yourself when you have someone to look down on. Haku considered this. You may be right. I certainly felt righteous in my anger. It was satisfying, in a way. I knew exactly who the villain was. And now? Haku looked at the man he had spent decades resenting. He saw the calluses on Jin's hands, the same calluses that marked his own. He saw the worry lines around Jin's eyes, the same worry about rebuilding, about survival, about the future. He saw a craftsman like himself, working hard, loving his trade, trying to make his way in an uncertain world. Now I see a neighbor, Haku said simply. Just a neighbor. When their workshops were finally rebuilt, Jin and Haku returned to their side-by-side lanes. But things were different now. They spoke when they passed. They borrowed tools when needed. Their wives, cautiously at first, and then, with growing warmth, began to share meals and conversation. Their children, freed from the inherited feud, became playmates. The other townspeople noticed the change and marveled at it. Some asked what had happened to transform such bitter enemies into friends. Jin and Haku found it hard to explain. It was not any one moment, they would say. It was the flood that threw them together, the shared struggle, the slow discovery that the enemy they had imagined was just a person after all. We were both wrong about each other, Jin said once, when a younger craftsman asked about the change. We had built stories in our minds, stories about who the other person was and what he had done. But the stories were not true. They were just stories. When we finally had to actually see each other, the stories fell apart. This story shows us how enmity can dissolve when we are forced to truly see the person we have made into an enemy. Jin and Haku had spent decades relating to their ideas of each other rather than to each other. It was only when circumstances stripped away the distance between them that they could see what was actually there, not a villain, but simply another person. Zen teaches us that our concepts are not reality. We build elaborate structures in our minds, stories about who is right and who is wrong, who deserves our love and who deserves our scorn. But these structures are made of thought, not of truth. When we set them aside and look directly at another person, we often find something very different from what we expected. Buddhism shows us that all beings want to be happy and free from suffering. The person we resent, the neighbor we avoid, the family member we have written off, they are all seeking the same thing we are. When we remember this, it becomes harder to maintain our hardened positions. The rigid line between us and them begins to soften. The Buddha taught loving kindness as an antidote to hatred. But sometimes we must begin more simply, not with love, but just with seeing. When Jin looked at Haku and saw a neighbor instead of an enemy, that was not yet love. It was simply clear seeing. And from clear seeing, everything else can grow. Allow your shoulders to release any tension they are holding. Let your breath flow without effort and rest in the growing stillness. We have explored compassion as presence, as understanding, as letting go. We have seen how it can soften our judgment of others, and free us from the weight of old resentments. But there is one person we often forget to include in the circle of our compassion, and that is ourselves. Many of us are far harder on ourselves than we would ever be on another person. We hold ourselves to impossible standards and then punish ourselves when we fall short. We speak to ourselves with a harshness we would never direct at a friend. We carry our mistakes like stones in our pockets, pulling them out again and again to remind ourselves of our failures. Zen Buddhism teaches that compassion which excludes ourselves is incomplete. We cannot truly offer kindness to others if we are at war with ourselves. The judgment we direct inward will eventually leak outward, coloring how we see the world. And the gentleness we cultivate toward ourselves becomes the ground from which all other compassion grows. This is not about excusing our mistakes or avoiding responsibility for harm we have caused. It is about holding ourselves with the same understanding we would offer a dear friend. It is about recognizing that we too are human, we too are learning, we too deserve kindness even when we stumble. Let us explore a story that shows how one woman learned to soften toward herself. In a town known for its textile market, there lived a weaver named Suki, whose cloth was admired throughout the region. Her patterns were intricate, her colors perfectly matched, her edges straight and true. Merchants came from distant cities to buy her work, and other weavers studied her techniques, hoping to learn her secrets. But Suki carried a burden that no one else could see. For every piece of cloth she sold, there were 3 or 4 that never left her workshop. These were the pieces with flaws, some so small that no customer would ever notice them. A thread slightly out of place, a color that did not quite match her vision, a pattern that wavered almost imperceptibly at one corner. To anyone else, these pieces would have seemed beautiful. To Suki, they were failures. She kept them in a back room, stacked in piles that grew higher each year. Sometimes she would take them out and examine them, running her fingers over the imperfections, feeling again the frustration of the moment when something had gone wrong. She could not sell them. She could not give them away. She could not even use them herself. They were evidence of her inadequacy, and she could not let them go. Her husband worried about her. He saw how she worked from first light until her eyes burned, how she often woke in the night to check her loom, how she ate little and laughed less. He tried to tell her that her work was beautiful, that no one expected perfection, that she was too hard on herself. But his words bounced off her like rain off stone. She knew what she knew. The flaws were real. Her failure to achieve perfection was real. No amount of kind words could change that. One autumn, a traveling nun came through the town, seeking shelter for a few nights before continuing her journey. She was an old woman with a weathered face and calm eyes, carrying nothing but a small bundle and a wooden bowl for alms. Something about her presence made people want to help her, and Suki's husband offered her a room in their home. The nun was quiet and undemanding, spending most of her time in meditation or walking slowly through the town. But she seemed to notice everything. On her second evening there, she asked Suki if she might see the workshop where such beautiful cloth was made. Suki was proud of her workshop, with its large loom and neat shelves of thread arranged by color. She showed the nun her current project, a complex pattern of interlocking circles that had taken weeks to design. The nun admired it genuinely, asking questions about the technique, touching the threads with gentle fingers. Then her eyes fell on the door to the back room, which Suki had left slightly ajar. "What is in there?" the nun asked. Suki felt her face flush. Nothing. Just storage. But the nun was already walking toward the door, and Suki found herself unable to stop her. The nun pushed it open and stood looking at the piles of cloth, the years of accumulated failures stacked nearly to the ceiling. "These are beautiful," the nun said, reaching out to touch the nearest piece. "Why are they hidden away?" "They are flawed," Suki said, her voice tight. "They are not good enough to sell." The nun picked up one of the cloths and unfolded it, examining it in the fading light from the window. It was a piece Suki had made 3 years ago, a pattern of leaves in autumn colors. There was a place near one edge where 2 threads had crossed incorrectly, creating a tiny bump in the otherwise smooth surface. "I cannot see the flaw," the nun said. "There." Suki pointed. "The threads are wrong. It ruins the whole piece." The nun looked at where Suki pointed, then looked back at the cloth as a whole. "I see a beautiful weaving. I see hours of careful work. I see skill and artistry. And yes, I see a small place where 2 threads crossed. But I do not see a ruined piece. I see a piece made by human hands." "It is not good enough," Suki insisted. "I should have done better." The nun set down the cloth and turned to face Suki directly. Her eyes were kind but penetrating. "Tell me, when you make a mistake in your weaving, what do you say to yourself?" Suki was caught off guard by the question. "I do not know. I suppose I tell myself that I should have been more careful, that I should know better by now, that I am careless and sloppy and will never be as good as I should be." And if a young weaver came to you, a student just learning the craft, and she made the same mistake, what would you say to her? Suki considered this. "I would tell her that mistakes are how we learn. That even masters make errors sometimes. That she should be patient with herself." "But you cannot say these things to yourself?" The question hung in the air. Suki felt something uncomfortable stirring in her chest, something she had been keeping at bay for years with her relentless work and harsh self-judgment. "I hold myself to a higher standard," she said finally. "Why?" "Because I should be better. Because I have been doing this for 20 years. Because perfection is possible if I just try hard enough." The nun smiled gently. "Perfection is not possible. Not in weaving, not in life. We are all making our way with imperfect hands and imperfect vision. The question is not whether we will fall short of perfection. We will. The question is how we will treat ourselves when we do." She gestured at the piles of cloth. "You have spent years punishing yourself for being human. Every piece in this room is a record of your own harshness toward yourself. But what if the flaw is not in the cloth? What if the flaw is in how you see yourself?" Suki felt tears rising, unexpected and unwelcome. She had kept them back for so long, burying her pain beneath her work, her standards, her relentless drive to be better. But the nun's words had found a crack in her armor. "I do not know how to be any other way," she admitted. "I have been like this for as long as I can remember. If I am not hard on myself, I will become lazy. I will stop improving. I will produce work that is truly flawed, not just imperfect." Is that what you believe? That kindness toward yourself would make you less skilled? Yes. The harshness drives me. It keeps me sharp. The nun nodded slowly, as if she had heard this before. And yet you are exhausted. Your husband worries about you. You cannot enjoy the beautiful things you make because you only see their flaws. The harshness may drive you, but where is it driving you? Toward happiness? Toward peace? Or toward a room full of cloth you cannot bear to look at? She picked up another piece from the pile, a blue fabric with a pattern of waves. This is exquisite work. Anyone would treasure it. But you have hidden it away because of some tiny imperfection that only you can see. What a waste. What a sad waste of beauty. Suki looked at the cloth in the nun's hands. She remembered making it, remembered the long days at the loom, the satisfaction when the pattern emerged. And she remembered the moment when she noticed the flaw, the crushing disappointment, the anger at herself for ruining yet another piece. "I do not know how to stop," she said quietly. "The voice that criticizes me is so loud. It has been with me for so long." "You do not have to stop all at once," the nun said. "You can begin small. When you notice the harsh voice, you can pause. You can ask yourself what you would say to a student or to a friend. And then you can try, just try, to offer yourself the same kindness." She pressed the blue cloth into Suki's hands. "Start with this one. Instead of seeing its flaw, try to see its beauty. Try to see the hours of your life woven into it. Try to see yourself in it, not your failure, but your humanity, your effort, your care." In the months after the nun left, Suki practiced what she had been taught. It was not easy. The harsh voice was indeed loud, and it had been running her life for decades. But she noticed it now in a way she never had before. She heard it telling her she was not good enough, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes, she was able to pause, to take a breath, to ask what she would say to a student who had made the same mistake. Slowly, the piles in the back room began to shrink. She gave some pieces to neighbors who were delighted to receive such beautiful work. She sold others at a reduced price, telling customers that they were slightly imperfect, watching their puzzled faces as they searched for flaws they could not find. She even kept one for herself, the blue cloth with the wave pattern, and used it as a cover for her bed. Every morning when she woke, she saw it, and she practiced seeing its beauty instead of its flaw. Her husband noticed the change in her. She laughed more easily now. She slept through the night. She still worked hard, still cared deeply about her craft, but there was a softness in her that had been missing before. The harshness had not disappeared entirely. It still rose up sometimes, still told her she was not good enough. But it no longer controlled her. She had learned to meet it with something gentler, and that gentleness was slowly transforming her life. This story shows us how the compassion we withhold from ourselves becomes a prison. Suki's impossible standards had driven her to great skill, but they had also driven her to exhaustion and joylessness. It was only when she learned to offer herself the same kindness she would offer a student that something began to shift. Zen teaches us that we are not separate from the world we judge. The harshness we direct at ourselves colors everything we see and do. When we are at war with ourselves, peace is impossible. But when we can hold our own imperfections with gentleness, we create a foundation from which true compassion can grow. Buddhism shows us that all beings deserve kindness, and this includes ourselves. The Buddha taught loving kindness as a practice that begins with oneself and then expands outward to include all beings. We cannot skip the first step. If we cannot wish ourselves well, our wishes for others will always be incomplete. The Buddha also taught that suffering comes from clinging, and one of the things we cling to most tightly is our idea of who we should be. When we cannot accept ourselves as we are, when we demand perfection and punish ourselves for falling short, we create suffering that no external achievement can relieve. Self-compassion is the release of this clinging, the willingness to be human, to be imperfect, to be enough just as we are. Let us explore another story that reveals more of this teaching. In a monastery high in the hills where mist hung in the valleys each morning, there lived a young monk named Ryo who was known for his seriousness. He had come to the monastery at 16, burning with the desire to become enlightened, to purify himself of all flaws, to become a perfect vessel for the teachings. Now he was 22, and the burning had not dimmed. Ryo was hard on himself in ways that other monks noticed and sometimes worried about. He slept less than anyone else, rising before dawn to sit in meditation while the others still slept. He ate less than his body needed, believing that hunger sharpened the mind. When he made a mistake in the chanting or had a wandering thought during sitting, he would punish himself by adding extra hours to his practice, as if he could make up for his failures through sheer effort. The other monks tried to speak to him about this sometimes, but Ryo dismissed their concerns. They did not understand, he thought. They had grown comfortable in their practice, had accepted their limitations, had stopped striving for the perfection that the teachings pointed toward. He would not make the same mistake. He would push himself until he broke through to the other side. The abbot of the monastery, an old man named Master Shen, watched Ryo with quiet concern. He had seen monks like this before. Some of them eventually softened, learning to hold themselves with more kindness. Others burned out entirely, leaving the monastery bitter and broken. A few had harmed themselves in their relentless pursuit of an impossible standard. Master Shen did not know yet which path Ryo would take, but he knew that something needed to change. One autumn morning, after the monks had finished their chanting and were preparing for the day's work, Master Shen called Ryo aside. "I have a task for you," the old man said. "A special practice that I want you to take on." Ryo felt a surge of pride. He had been waiting for this, for the master to recognize his dedication and give him advanced teachings. "I am ready, master." Shen reached into his robe and brought out a small bundle of cloth. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a tiny bird with gray and white feathers. The bird was alive but clearly injured, one wing held awkwardly against its body. "I found this sparrow in the garden this morning," Shen said. "It cannot fly. It may live or it may die, but for now, it needs care. I want you to be responsible for it." Ryo stared at the bird, confused. "But master, what about my practice? Caring for a bird will take time away from meditation. This is your practice now. The bird needs food and water several times each day. It needs warmth and protection. It needs gentle handling, as its wing is fragile. I want you to give it the same attention you give to your sitting." "For how long?" "Until it flies away or until it dies. However long that takes." Ryo wanted to argue, to explain that this was a waste of his time, that he had come to the monastery to pursue enlightenment, not to nurse injured animals. But the look in Master Shen's eyes stopped him. There was something there, a knowing quality that made Rio feel seen in a way that was uncomfortable. He took the bird. The first days were frustrating. The bird needed feeding every few hours, which meant Rio had to interrupt his meditation to prepare tiny portions of seeds and insects. It needed water dripped carefully onto its beak. It needed its small nest kept clean. All of this took time, and Rio found himself falling behind in his practice, unable to maintain the punishing schedule he had set for himself. He was impatient with the bird at first. It was so small, so fragile, so dependent on him for everything. When it made messes, he felt irritated. When it refused to eat, he felt frustrated. When it huddled in the corner of its box, shivering and afraid, he felt impatient. Why would it not just get better? Why did it require so much care? But as the days passed, something began to shift. Rio found himself watching the bird more closely, noticing its small movements, the way it cocked its head when it heard a sound, the way it fluffed its feathers against the cold. He noticed that his impatience frightened it, made it shrink away from his hands. And he noticed that when he moved slowly and spoke softly, the bird relaxed and ate more willingly. He began to adjust his approach. Instead of hurrying through the feeding so he could get back to his practice, he slowed down. He spoke gently to the bird as he offered it food. He held it carefully, supporting its injured wing, warming it against his chest when the mornings were cold. The bird responded to this gentleness, growing calmer and more trusting. One morning, as Rio sat with the bird cupped in his hands, watching it eat seeds from his palm, a thought arose unbidden. This is how I should treat myself. The thought surprised him. He looked at the bird, so small and fragile, and he realized that he would never treat it the way he treated himself. He would never punish the bird for being injured, never demand that it fly before its wing had healed, never withhold food because it had failed to make progress quickly enough. He offered the bird nothing but patience and gentleness, because that was what it needed to heal. But he offered himself none of these things. He punished himself for every failure. He demanded impossible progress. He withheld rest and food and kindness, believing that harshness would make him stronger. Looking at the bird in his hands, he saw suddenly how absurd this was. How could cruelty lead to healing? How could punishment lead to freedom? He brought this insight to Master Shen that evening, uncertain what to make of it. The old monk nodded, as if he had been expecting this. "Tell me," he said, "if the bird could speak and it told you that it was worthless because its wing was broken, what would you say?" "I would tell it that its wing would heal, that being injured does not make it worthless, that it simply needs time and care. And if it told you that it was bad for needing so much help, for not being able to fly like other birds, what would you say?" "I would tell it that needing help is not a flaw, that we all need help sometimes, that there is no shame in being injured. And if it told you that it should punish itself for being a burden, for taking up your time, for not healing faster, what would you say?" Rio felt something breaking open in his chest. "I would tell it that punishing itself would only slow the healing. That kindness is what it needs, not cruelty. That it is worthy of care exactly as it is." Master Shen smiled gently. "Now tell me why you do not say these things to yourself." Rio had no answer. The question hung in the air between them, unanswerable, and yet somehow already answered. He thought of all the times he had punished himself for falling short, All the harsh words he had spoken to himself in the privacy of his own mind, all the ways he had withheld kindness from himself while believing he was pursuing something higher. "I did not see it," he said finally. "I thought I was being disciplined. I thought the harshness was making me stronger. But it is not, is it? It is just hurting me." "The bird cannot heal if it is afraid," Shen said. "And neither can you. The gentleness you offer so easily to a small creature is the same gentleness you need to offer yourself. Not because you have earned it, but because all beings deserve kindness, including you." Over the following weeks, Rio continued to care for the sparrow. Its wings slowly healed, and the day came when it could flutter from one side of its box to the other. Rio found himself celebrating these small victories, feeling genuine joy at the bird's progress. And he found himself, slowly and imperfectly, learning to celebrate his own small victories too. To notice when he had sat well, not just when he had failed. To acknowledge his effort, not just his shortcomings. To speak to himself, sometimes with the same gentleness he used with the bird. When the sparrow finally flew away, disappearing into the morning mist over the hills, Rio stood watching for a long time. He felt a mix of sadness and gladness, of loss and gratitude. The bird had taught him something that all his years of harsh practice had never taught him. That healing happens through kindness. That growth happens through patience. That the perfection he had been seeking was not a destination to be reached through punishment, but a softening that came when he finally stopped fighting against himself. This story shows us that the kindness we offer easily to others is often the very kindness we withhold from ourselves. Rio could not see his own self-cruelty until he experienced what true gentleness looked like in caring for the injured bird. The contrast opened his eyes to what he had been doing to himself all along. Zen teaches us that practice is not about perfecting ourselves through force. It is about creating the conditions for something natural to emerge. A flower does not force itself to bloom. It simply needs the right conditions: sunlight and water and time. We are the same. When we stop punishing ourselves and start offering kindness, something that was always there can finally unfold. Buddhism shows us that suffering and compassion are deeply linked. The suffering we carry often comes from the harshness with which we treat ourselves, and the compassion that can relieve that suffering begins with the simple act of turning kindness inward. This is not selfishness. It is the foundation of all genuine compassion. We cannot give what we do not have. But when we have received kindness from ourselves, we have an endless supply to offer others. The Buddha taught that we should treat ourselves as we would treat a beloved child, not with indulgence or avoidance of responsibility, but with patience and encouragement and care. The child will make mistakes. The child will fall short, but we do not punish the child for learning. We offer guidance with kindness, trusting that this is how true growth happens. Allow your breath to soften and deepen. Rest in the quietness of this moment, offering yourself the same patience you would offer any being who was learning and growing. We often imagine compassion as something grand, a heroic rescue, a life-changing gift, a sacrifice that transforms everything. We wait for the big moments, the dramatic opportunities to show our caring. And while we wait, countless small moments pass us by. But Zen Buddhism teaches us that there are no small moments. Every encounter is complete in itself. Every interaction carries the possibility of kindness. The cup of tea offered to a tired visitor, the patient listening when someone needs to speak, the gentle word that costs us nothing but means everything to the one who receives it. These small acts of compassion are not less than the grand gestures. They are the very fabric of a compassionate life. Most of us will never have the chance to save a life in a dramatic way. But all of us, every day, have chances to offer small kindnesses that ripple outward in ways we may never see. A moment of attention can shift someone's entire day. A word of encouragement can plant a seed that grows for years. We do not need to wait for extraordinary circumstances to live with compassion. The ordinary circumstances of our daily lives are enough. Let us explore a story that shows how small kindnesses can matter more than we know. In a mountain town where the road wound steeply between rocky cliffs, there was a small inn run by a woman named Hana. It was not a grand establishment, just a modest building with a few rooms and a kitchen where Hana prepared simple meals for travelers passing through. The town was a stopping point on the way to somewhere else, and most guests stayed only a single night before continuing their journeys. Hana had run the inn for 30 years, since her husband's death had left her with the choice of keeping the place going or losing everything. She had kept it going. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, cleaned the rooms herself, washed the linens in the stream behind the building, and fell asleep each night tired to her bones. It was a hard life, but it was her life, and she had made peace with it. She did not think of herself as anyone special. She simply did what needed to be done, treating each guest as she would want to be treated, offering what comfort she could within her modest means. A warm room, a hot meal, a listening ear if someone needed to talk. These things seemed ordinary to her, barely worth noticing. One autumn evening, 3 travelers arrived at her door within an hour of each other, each seeking shelter for the night. The first was a young woman with red-rimmed eyes and a bundle clutched tightly to her chest. The second was an old man with a walking stick, moving slowly, as if each step cost him effort. The third was a merchant with fine clothes but a worried expression, checking his purse repeatedly as if afraid of what he might find. Hana welcomed each of them, showed them to their rooms, and began preparing dinner. As she worked in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and stirring the pot, she thought about her guests as she often did, wondering about their stories, hoping she could make their night a little easier. The young woman came down first, sitting alone at a table in the corner, her eyes fixed on something far away. Hana brought her tea without being asked, setting it down gently and pausing for just a moment. "Long journey?" she asked. The young woman looked up, startled, as if she had forgotten she was not alone. "Yes, very long. The tea will warm you. Dinner will be ready soon." Hana did not press for more. She could see that the woman was carrying something heavy, something she was not ready to share. So Hana simply let her presence be felt, moving about the room, humming softly as she set the tables, being there without demanding anything. When the old man came down, walking carefully with his stick, Hana noticed that he winced when he sat down. She brought him a cushion without comment, placing it on the wooden bench. "For your back," she said. "The benches here are hard." The old man looked at the cushion, then at Hana, and something in his face softened. "Thank you. You are observant." I have seen many travelers. The body speaks even when the mouth does not. She brought him tea as well, and when she saw him struggling to lift the heavy pot to pour, she poured for him, again without comment, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The merchant came down last, still checking his purse, still wearing that worried expression. Hana noticed that despite his fine clothes, he hesitated when he looked at the menu she had written on a board near the kitchen, his eyes going to the prices rather than the dishes. When she brought his tea, she said casually, "The vegetable stew tonight is especially good. My best recipe. And there is plenty of it, so second helpings are free." It was a small thing, but she saw his shoulders relax slightly. Whatever his money troubles, he would eat well tonight without worrying about the cost. Dinner was quiet. The three travelers ate separately, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Hana moved between them, refilling tea, bringing bread, clearing plates. She noticed things. The way the young woman barely touched her food at first, then began to eat as if suddenly remembering she was hungry. The way the old man closed his eyes after the first bite, savoring the warmth. The way the merchant asked quietly for those second helpings, his voice carrying a note of gratitude. After dinner, as the travelers sat digesting their meals, the young woman suddenly began to cry. It came without warning, tears streaming down her face, her hands covering her eyes. The merchant looked away, embarrassed. The old man watched, with gentle concern but did not move. Hana walked over and sat down across from the young woman. She did not say anything. She simply placed her hand on the table, palm up, an offering. After a moment, the young woman reached out and took it, gripping tightly, her sobs slowly quieting. When she could speak, the young woman said, "I am sorry. I do not know why I am crying. You do not even know me." "You do not need to explain," Hana said. "Tears come when they need to come. This is a safe place to let them." The young woman held Hana's hand for a long time. She did not share her story, and Hana did not ask. Eventually the tears stopped, and the young woman wiped her face with her sleeve, looking embarrassed but also somehow lighter. "Thank you," she whispered. "There is nothing to thank. Go rest now. Tomorrow is a new day." Later that night, after the guests had retired to their rooms, the old man lingered by the fire. Hana sat with him for a while, mending a torn sheet, enjoying the quiet companionship. "You have a gift," the old man said finally. "You made that young woman feel safe enough to cry. You made me feel like my aching bones were seen. You even made that anxious merchant relax. This is not nothing." Hana shook her head. "I just do what any host would do." "No. Many hosts provide a room and a meal. You provide something else. I cannot name it exactly. Attention, perhaps. Care. A feeling that the person in front of you actually matters." Hana was quiet for a moment, her needle moving through the fabric. "I think everyone matters. Every person who walks through my door is carrying something. I cannot fix their problems. I am just an innkeeper. But I can make sure that for one night they feel a little less alone." "That is more than you know," the old man said. "More than you will ever know." The three travelers left the next morning, continuing on their separate journeys. Hana waved goodbye and then turned back to her work, stripping the beds, washing the dishes, preparing for whoever might arrive that night. She did not give much thought to the people who had stayed. They were travelers, passing through. She would likely never see them again. But their stories continued after they left her inn. And in each story, that night mattered in ways Hannah would never learn. The young woman was traveling to a distant city to start a new life after a painful ending. She had been questioning whether she had the strength to continue. But something about the kindness she had received at the inn, the hand held without expectation, the permission to cry without judgment, had shifted something in her. She arrived at her destination with a fragile but real sense that she could do this, that strangers could be kind, that she was not as alone as she had felt. Years later, when she was established in her new life, she would remember that night at the inn as a turning point, though she could not quite say why. The old man was making one last journey to visit a place he had known in his youth. His body was failing, and he knew his time was limited. He had been feeling like a burden, like someone whose needs were too great for others to bear. But the innkeeper had anticipated his needs without making him feel pitiful. The cushion, the poured tea, the quiet respect. He continued his journey feeling seen rather than invisible, dignified rather than diminished. When he finally reached his destination and stood looking at the place he had come to see, he felt a peace he had not expected, and he carried the memory of Hannah's kindness with him to his last days. The merchant's fine clothes were a disguise. His business had failed, and he was traveling to ask a distant relative for help, dreading the humiliation of admitting his ruin. He had been counting his coins obsessively, terrified of running out before he reached his destination. The innkeeper's casual mention of free second helpings, offered without pity or condescension, had given him something he badly needed that night. Not just food, but a sense that he was still a person worthy of generosity. He reached his relative's house and asked for help, and help was given. Years later, when his fortunes had recovered, he remembered the mountain inn and the woman who had fed him without shaming him, and he made a practice of offering the same quiet dignity to others in need. None of these travelers ever returned to tell Hannah what her small kindnesses had meant. She continued her life at the inn, rising before dawn, falling asleep tired each night, treating each guest with the same simple care she had always shown. She never knew that she had been a turning point, a bright spot, a moment of grace in journeys she could not follow. But perhaps that is how compassion works most of the time. We offer what we can, and we let it go. We do not see the ripples spreading outward. We may never know what our small kindnesses mean to others, but they mean something. They always mean something. This story shows us that compassion does not require grand gestures. Hannah did nothing extraordinary. She offered a cushion to someone with a sore back. She held the hand of someone who was crying. She mentioned free second helpings so a worried man could eat without shame. Each of these acts was small, almost invisible, but each one mattered deeply to the person who received it. Zen teaches us that enlightenment is not somewhere else, not in some special state or distant achievement. It is right here, in this moment, in this simple act. The same is true of compassion. We do not need to wait for the dramatic opportunity. Every moment offers a chance to be kind. The question is only whether we will notice. Buddhism shows us that all beings are interconnected. Our actions ripple outward in ways we cannot track. The small kindness we offer today may touch someone we will never meet, may change a situation we will never know about, may continue echoing long after we are gone. This is not a burden, but a gift. It means that our ordinary lives, our ordinary days, are full of significance we do not see. The Buddha taught that generosity is one of the great virtues, a foundation of the spiritual path. But generosity is not only about giving money or gifts. It is about giving attention, giving time, giving presence. It is about offering what we have, whatever that may be, with an open heart. Hannah's generosity was the generosity of care, of noticing, of treating each person as worthy of kindness. This is available to all of us, whatever our circumstances. Let us explore another story that reveals more of this teaching. In a farming valley where the river wound between green fields, there lived a farmer named Shin who was known for his hard work and steady ways. He rose with the sun and worked until it set, tending his crops, caring for his animals, maintaining the stone walls that kept the river from flooding his land. He was not a wealthy man, but he had enough, and he was content with his life. One late afternoon in early summer, Shin was walking home from the far fields when he came upon a stranger sitting by the side of the road. The man was not old, perhaps 40 years, but he looked exhausted, his clothes dusty and worn, his face pale with fatigue. A small bundle lay beside him, and he was staring at the ground as if he lacked the energy to look up. Shin stopped. It was late, and he was tired himself. The fields were calling to him, always more work to be done. It would have been easy to walk past, to assume someone else would help, to tell himself that the stranger's troubles were not his concern. But something made him pause. Perhaps it was the slump of the man's shoulders, the particular quality of his stillness. Shin knew exhaustion. He saw it in himself after the longest days of harvest, and he saw it now in this stranger. The man looked up slowly. His eyes were dull with weariness. Just tired. I have been walking for many days. I will rest here for a while and then continue. Shin looked at the sky. The sun was beginning its descent toward the hills. It will be dark in a few hours. Where are you headed? The next town. I was told it was not far. It is still half a day's walk. You will not make it before nightfall. The stranger nodded, as if this news did not surprise him. Then I will sleep by the road and continue in the morning. Shin considered this. He thought of his own bed, the warm meal his wife would have waiting, the comfortable routine of his evening. Then he thought of this man, sleeping in the dirt by the roadside, cold and hungry and alone. Come with me, Shin said. My home is not far. You can eat dinner with us and sleep in the barn tonight. The hay is clean and warm. The stranger looked at him with something like suspicion, as if kindness from a stranger was a thing to be wary of. I have nothing to offer in return. I cannot pay for lodging. I am not asking for payment. I am offering a meal and a roof. That is all. Still the stranger hesitated. Shin could see that he was struggling with something, perhaps pride, perhaps the habit of self-reliance, perhaps simple distrust of unexpected kindness. My wife makes good soup, Shin added, a slight smile on his weathered face. And the barn is dry. Much better than the roadside. Finally, the stranger nodded and rose stiffly to his feet. Shin picked up the man's bundle without being asked and slung it over his own shoulder. They walked together toward Shin's farm, not speaking much, the comfortable silence of tired men at the end of a long day. Shin's wife welcomed the stranger without question. She had been married to Shin for 20 years and knew his ways. When he brought home a stray cat or helped a neighbor with a broken fence, she did not ask why. She simply made room. She set another place at the table and ladled out an extra bowl of soup, and if she gave her husband a warm look that said she was proud of him, neither of them mentioned it. The stranger ate hungrily, though he tried to hide it, taking small bites and chewing slowly as if to make the meal last. Shin noticed, but said nothing. He remembered times in his own youth when he had been hungry and far from home, remembered the kindness of strangers who had fed him without asking questions. After dinner, Shin took the stranger to the barn and showed him where to sleep. The hay was indeed clean and warm, piled deep in a corner, with a blanket folded on top. Shin lit a small lantern and left it hanging by the door. If you need anything, the house is just there. Do not hesitate to knock. The stranger looked around the barn, at the orderly tools on the walls, the healthy animals in their stalls, the obvious care that Shin put into maintaining this place. You are kind, he said. Why? Shin considered the question. Because I would hope someone would do the same for me. Because you needed help and I could give it. Because it costs me very little and may mean much to you. He paused. Is any other reason needed? The stranger was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I have not been treated with kindness in a long time. I had forgotten what it felt like. Then perhaps you will remember now. Sleep well. Shin returned to his house, finished his evening chores, and went to bed. He did not think much more about the stranger. It had been a small thing, an hour's detour from his routine, a portion of soup and some hay in the barn. Nothing that would change his life or require any real sacrifice. In the morning, the stranger was gone. He had left before dawn, the blanket neatly folded, the lantern extinguished. On top of the blanket was a small piece of paper with a few words written on it. Thank you for reminding me. Shin read the note, tucked it into his pocket, and went about his day. The fields needed tending. The animals needed feeding. Life continued as it always had. He did not learn until many years later what his small kindness had meant. The stranger's name was Nobu, and he had been walking to end his life. He had lost his wife to illness, his business to debt, his home to creditors. Everything he had built over 40 years had crumbled, and he saw no reason to continue. He was walking to the cliffs beyond the next town, where the river plunged into a deep gorge. He had planned to throw himself in. But the night in Shin's barn had changed something. The meal offered without expectation. The clean hay prepared with care. The simple words about hoping someone would do the same. These small kindnesses had cracked something open in Nobu, had reminded him that human beings could be gentle with each other, that the world was not only loss and cruelty. He did not go to the cliffs. Instead, he went to the next town and found work as a laborer. It was hard, and the pay was poor, but he was alive. Slowly, over years, he rebuilt. Not to what he had been, but to something smaller and more sustainable. He married again, a widow with children who needed a father. He made a life. And whenever he encountered someone who was struggling, someone who was exhausted and alone and near the end of their endurance, he stopped. He offered what he could: a meal, a place to sleep, a word of kindness. He did not tell them why, did not share his own story of the night in the barn. But he passed along what Shin had given him, again and again, a ripple spreading outward from that single act of ordinary compassion. Shin never knew any of this. He continued his life on the farm, working the land, helping neighbors when he could, offering kindness as naturally as he breathed. The note he had found in the barn was eventually lost, forgotten in a drawer somewhere. He did not think of himself as someone who had saved a life. He had only given a stranger a meal and a place to sleep. It had seemed like nothing at the time. But it was not nothing. It was never nothing. This story shows us that we often cannot see the significance of our own actions. Shin's kindness seemed small to him, barely worth mentioning. He did not know that he was standing at a turning point in another man's life, that his simple offer of food and shelter was the difference between life and death. We rarely know such things. We act and we let go, and the ripples spread outward beyond our sight. Zen teaches us to do what is in front of us with wholeheartedness, without attachment to outcome. We offer kindness not because we know it will have grand results, but because kindness is the natural expression of a heart that sees clearly. What happens after we act is not ours to control or even to know. Our task is simply to respond to what is here with whatever care we can offer. Buddhism shows us that every being we encounter is carrying a burden we cannot see. The stranger by the roadside may be tired or may be dying inside. We cannot know, but we can treat each person as if they might be in their darkest hour, as if our small kindness might be the light they need. This is not a heavy burden. It is simply a way of moving through the world with open eyes and an open heart. The Buddha taught that compassion is not about grand achievements or recognized virtue. It is about the simple, repeated choice to respond with care. Each moment offers this choice. Each encounter is an opportunity. We do not need special training or extraordinary circumstances. We need only the willingness to see, to stop, to offer what we have. Let your body rest more deeply now, releasing any remaining tension. Know that the small kindnesses you have offered, perhaps forgotten now, may still be rippling outward in ways you will never see. We have explored many faces of compassion tonight. Compassion as presence. Compassion as understanding. Compassion that lets go of control. Compassion for those who have hurt us. Compassion for ourselves. Compassion in the small, ordinary moments of daily life. Now we come to something that ties all of this together. What if compassion is not something we have to create or cultivate from the outside? What if it is already here, our natural state, simply waiting to be uncovered? Zen Buddhism teaches that our deepest nature is not separate from the nature of all things. The walls we build between ourselves and others, the sense of being isolated individuals looking out at a foreign world, these are constructions of the mind. They feel real, but they are not as solid as they seem. When we look closely, when we practice with sincerity, we discover that the boundaries we take for granted begin to soften. And when the boundaries soften, compassion flows naturally. We do not have to manufacture it. We do not have to force ourselves to care. The caring is already there, just as water is already in the well. Our task is not to create the water, but to remove the stones that block it. Let us explore a story that shows how one woman discovered this truth. In a region where mountain streams fed into wide rivers, there lived a woman named Kina who had been deeply hurt. In her youth, she had loved freely and been betrayed. She had trusted openly and been taken advantage of. She had offered her heart and had it handed back in pieces. By the time she was 30, she had built walls around herself so thick that nothing could get through. She was not unkind, exactly. She followed the rules of politeness. She helped neighbors when help was required. She did her duty to family and community. But there was a distance in her eyes, a guardedness that people could feel. No one got close to Kina. She did not allow it. She told herself this was wisdom. She had learned from her mistakes. The world was full of people who would hurt you if you let them, and the only sensible response was to let no one in. Her walls were protection, necessary and reasonable. If she felt lonely sometimes, if something in her ached for connection, she pushed those feelings aside. Loneliness was safer than betrayal. In her 40th year, Kina heard about a teacher who was visiting a temple in a nearby town. People spoke of this teacher with unusual reverence, saying that she had a way of seeing into hearts and offering exactly what was needed. Some said she was enlightened, though the teacher herself laughed at such words. Kina did not believe in enlightenment or special teachers, but something made her curious enough to make the journey. She found the teacher, an old woman named Master Yori, sitting in the temple garden, surrounded by people who had come seeking guidance. Kina watched from a distance at first, skeptical. The teacher did not seem special. She was small and wrinkled, with plain robes and a simple manner. She spoke quietly with each person who approached, listened carefully, offered a few words. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that looked like wisdom being dispensed. But Kina noticed something. The people who spoke with Master Yori seemed to change as they talked. Their shoulders would relax. Their faces would soften. Something would shift in them that Kina could see but not explain. And when they walked away, they moved differently, as if a weight had been lifted. She found herself moving closer, drawn despite her skepticism. Eventually, she was sitting near the front of the small group, close enough to hear what was being said. And then Master Yori looked directly at her. "You have been watching for a long time," the teacher said. "What is it you are looking for?" Kina had not prepared an answer. She had not planned to speak at all. But something about the teacher's gaze, steady and warm and completely without judgment, loosened something in her. "I do not know," she admitted. "I came out of curiosity. I do not believe in teachers or teachings, but something made me come." Master Yori nodded, as if this were a perfectly reasonable thing to say. "What is your name?" "Kina." "Kina, tell me, are you happy?" The question was so direct that Kina did not have time to construct a defense. "No," she said. The word surprised her. She had not meant to be so honest. "Why not?" "Because the world is painful. Because people cannot be trusted. Because every time I have opened myself to others, I have been hurt. And so you have closed yourself." "Yes." It is the only sensible response. Master Yori was quiet for a moment. The garden was peaceful, birds singing in the trees, water flowing somewhere nearby. When she spoke again, her voice was gentle. "You believe your walls protect you. But tell me honestly, have they stopped the pain?" Kina wanted to say yes, but the truth was different. The pain had not stopped. It had just changed form. Instead of the sharp pain of betrayal, there was the dull ache of isolation. Instead of wounds from others, there was the quiet suffering of a heart that had forgotten how to open. "No," she admitted. "The pain continues. It is just a different kind of pain. That is because the walls do not protect you from suffering. They only change what kind of suffering you experience. And they block something else too, something that could actually help. What is that? Connection. Love. The natural compassion that flows between beings when nothing blocks it." Master Yori leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, when you see a child fall and scrape their knee, what do you feel?" Kina thought about it. "I feel their pain. I want to help them. When you see an old person struggling to carry something heavy, what do you feel?" "I want to help them too. I do help, usually. When you see an animal caught in a trap, suffering and afraid, what do you feel?" "My heart aches. I want to free them." Master Yori smiled. "You see? The compassion is already there. It arises naturally when you witness suffering. You do not have to create it. You do not have to force yourself to care. The caring happens by itself, as natural as breathing. But that is different. Children and old people and animals have not hurt me. It is easy to feel compassion for them. Is it different? Or is the same compassion present, but blocked in some cases by stories your mind tells you? The child has not hurt you, so the walls are not raised. The animal has not betrayed you, so the heart stays open. But the person who reminds you of someone who caused you pain, the walls go up immediately, and the natural compassion cannot flow." Kina sat with this. She thought of the times she had closed herself off from people, sometimes before they had done anything wrong, simply because something about them triggered her old wounds. She had called this wisdom, but perhaps it was just fear dressed up in reasonable clothing. "The walls are not protecting you," Master Yori continued. "They are imprisoning you. They keep out the possibility of being hurt, yes, but they also keep out the possibility of being loved, of loving, of feeling the natural warmth that flows between beings when nothing blocks it. You have traded one kind of suffering for another and called it safety. But if I take down the walls, I will be hurt again. People will take advantage. They will betray me. Perhaps some people are careless with others' hearts, but not all people. And even the hurt of betrayal, sharp as it is, may be easier to bear than the slow death of a heart that has forgotten how to open." Master Yori paused. "Let me ask you something else. When you are alone at night and the walls are all in place and no one can get in, how do you feel?" Kina did not want to answer, but the teacher's eyes were patient, waiting. "Lonely," she whispered. "So lonely." "Yes, because you are a human being, and human beings need connection the way plants need water. You can survive for a while without it, but you cannot truly live. The walls that keep out pain also keep out life." They talked for a long time that afternoon. Master Yori did not tell Kina to tear down her walls immediately. She understood that they had been built over many years for what seemed like good reasons, and they would not come down in a day. But she offered Kina a different way of seeing. "Your natural state is openness," she said. "The walls are something you built. They are not who you are. Beneath them, the capacity for connection, for compassion, for love, all of that remains. It has been covered over, but it has not been destroyed. You can begin, slowly, to let some light in. Not all at once, just a crack, just enough to remember what warmth feels like. In the months that followed, Kina practiced this. It was not easy. Every instinct told her to keep the walls up, to protect herself, to trust no one. But she began to notice when the walls arose, to feel them going up in her body, the tightening in her chest, the hardening around her heart. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, she would pause instead of letting the walls complete themselves. She would breathe. She would remind herself that this person in front of her was not the same as those who had hurt her in the past. Slowly, something began to change. She made a friend, a neighbor woman who had been reaching out for years and whom Kina had always kept at a distance. She allowed herself to enjoy the friendship, to share small pieces of herself, to receive the warmth that was offered. It was terrifying at first. Every moment of closeness triggered the old fear. But the neighbor was patient and kind, and gradually Kina's heart remembered what it felt like to be open. She did not become naive. She did not throw herself into every relationship without discernment. The wounds from her past had taught her something real about being careful. But careful was different from closed. She could pay attention to who was trustworthy without assuming everyone was a threat. She could protect herself without imprisoning herself. And as the walls came down, piece by piece, Kina discovered what Master Yori had told her. The compassion was already there. It had always been there. It flowed naturally now, not just toward children and animals and old people, but toward the difficult neighbor, the irritating relative, even strangers on the road. The warmth that had been locked inside her, frozen behind walls of fear, was thawing. And as it thawed, her loneliness began to ease. She returned to see Master Yori one more time, years later. The teacher was very old now, her body frail, but her eyes still held that same warm clarity. "I came to thank you," Kina said. "You showed me that my walls were not protecting me, that the compassion I thought I had to guard was actually the way back to life." Master Yori smiled. "I showed you nothing. I only reminded you of what you already knew. The openness was always there, waiting. You simply stopped covering it up. It seems so simple now. How did I not see it before? We build our walls so carefully that we forget they are there. We think they are part of us, part of reality. It takes someone from outside to point at them and say, 'Look, that is a wall you built. You can choose to take it down.'" Kina sat with the old teacher in silence for a while, feeling the peace that came from an open heart, the warmth that flowed between them without effort. She thought about all the years she had lived behind her walls, all the connections she had missed, all the love she had blocked. There was grief in those thoughts, but also gratitude. She had found her way back. That was what mattered now. This story shows us that compassion is not something we have to create from nothing. Kina's capacity for care had never disappeared. It had been buried beneath walls of fear, but it was always there, waiting. When she began to dismantle the walls, the compassion flowed naturally, as water flows when a dam is removed. Zen teaches us that our true nature is already complete. We do not need to add anything to ourselves or become someone different. We only need to remove the obstructions, the fears and defenses, and false beliefs that block what is already present. This is as true for compassion as for anything else. The heart knows how to care. We simply have to stop preventing it. Buddhism shows us that all beings share this same basic nature. The capacity for compassion is not special to a few saints or sages. It is the birthright of every creature that feels. When we recognize this, we can trust our own hearts more fully. The warmth we feel toward a suffering child is the same warmth that can extend to all beings. It is only our mental constructions that limit its reach. The Buddha taught that we are all connected, all part of one fabric of existence. The sense of being separate, isolated, alone, this is a kind of illusion created by the mind. When we see through the illusion, compassion arises naturally because we recognize that the other is not truly other. Their suffering is our suffering. Their joy is our joy. The walls between us are thinner than we thought. Take a slow breath now and let your body settle completely. The compassion that has always been with you remains, quiet and warm, asking nothing. Rest in its presence as you would rest in the presence of an old friend. We have traveled far together tonight, exploring the many faces of compassion. We have seen that true compassion begins with presence, with simply being with another person without needing to fix or change them. We have discovered how understanding can soften our judgments, how seeing through another's eyes dissolves the walls between us. We have learned that compassion sometimes means letting go, offering our help with open hands rather than grasping fingers, trusting others to walk their own paths. We have found that even those who have hurt us are suffering too, and that releasing our resentment frees us more than it frees them. We have remembered to include ourselves in the circle of kindness, to offer ourselves the same gentleness we would give a dear friend. We have seen how the smallest acts of care can ripple outward in ways we may never know, touching lives we will never see. And finally, we have discovered that compassion is not something we must create. It is already here, our natural state, waiting beneath the walls we have built. When we stop blocking it, it flows as naturally as water, as warmly as sunlight. As you rest now, know that this compassion lives in you. It has always lived in you. You do not need to become someone different to access it. You need only to let your heart be what it already is. May you be gentle with yourself tonight. May you carry this gentleness into tomorrow, offering it freely to all you meet. And may you rest in the quiet, knowing that beneath all our struggles and defenses, we are all connected, all worthy of kindness, all home. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Monk.